Good evening, everyone. Today is Thursday, September 30th, 2021, Transportation Commission meeting, and we are all joined here virtually. My name is Bridget Obikoya, and I am the staff liaison for the Transportation Commission. This meeting is being recorded, so I ask that you please turn off your mics when you are not speaking. But before we start with the first agenda item, are there any citizen comments on matters not on the agenda? Hearing none, I would turn things over to you, Commissioner Slatt.
Thank you very much. I'm Chris Slatt, Chair of the Transportation Commission. Welcome everybody to what is our October meeting, though we are still technically slightly in September. And all I want to get out here in the beginning is to welcome our new commissioner. Commissioner Ludlow is new, and this is his first meeting. Commissioner Ludlow works professionally in transportation with a focus on freight, which is something we rarely have on the commission. So it's great to have, and excited to move forward. And with that, I will throw things back to you, Ms. Obikoya, for our first agenda item.
Okay.
You're muted, Ms. Obikoya.
Can you guys hear me okay? Because I may have phone off for a second. All right.
Okay, yeah, for some reason my mute wasn't working. The first agenda item is Pentagon City Planning Study with Matt Matuzek, Michelle Stafford, and Dan Mulliff, and I'll turn it over to you guys.
Great. Thank you, and good evening, everyone. I'm just going to let Dan pull up the presentation so everybody can have the same starting point.
There we go. Can you see it? Great.
There it is. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Matuzek, and I am the planning coordinator for Pentagon City and Crystal City, and also representing the planning division. I'm joined tonight by Michelle Stafford and Dan Molloff from the Department of Environmental Services. And collectively, we wanted to provide an update on the planning work that has taken place in Pentagon City over the last 14 months or so. So the presentation we have here, which we posted ahead of time, I think will give you a sense of what that involves, and we look forward to any comments and discussion that may follow. Next slide. So tonight's agenda involves an update that is structured really into 4 key areas. I realize not everyone may be as familiar with the study, and therefore this presentation intentionally covers some background information that will ensure we all have a common starting point moving forward and allow everybody an opportunity to have some thoughtful feedback either tonight or moving beyond into the fall. Next slide. And one more. Keep forgetting about these section breaks. So that really begins with the underlying question of why is the study even taking place? So to understand that better, we have to kind of go back a few years, where following Amazon's 2018 decision to locate their second headquarters in Arlington, there has been considerable attention given to how those headquarters may shape the immediate vicinity in which they will be located. So during this time, various stakeholders began to consider just how the surrounding Pentagon City neighborhood should react to that new reality. So much of the development surrounding Pentagon City is guided by earlier planning efforts during the mid-1970s, which established the original mixed-use vision for the area. This is what we refer to as the Pentagon City Phased Development Site Plan, or PDSP, which at the time preceded any sector or area plan work by county planners. In fact, the original name for this was Master Development Plan, which we no longer use in our planning efforts. So since that policy document had only undertaken about one major update, which was in 1997, and considering the impact Amazon's arrival will have on the area, it was determined that a comprehensive analysis of key Pentagon City properties was not just timely, but appropriate. So the intent of the ongoing effort is really to identify conditions under which future growth in the area would be appropriate and could implement a more current vision supported by the community. Next slide. So to aid in this study, county staff has enlisted the help of a consultant team very familiar with Arlington County, and also established a focus group comprised of various stakeholder representatives, which were chaired by the planning commissioners, Jim Lintelme and Jane Siegel. Throughout the study, this group helped facilitate many thoughtful conversations and also offered insightful feedback on all aspects of the Pentagon City draft plan. Next slide. The planning effort started in the summer of 2020. We had some initial stakeholder interviews conducted, which led to a more formal community kickoff approximately a year ago. This was followed by 5 public workshops and approximately a dozen focus group meetings in between, which concluded just this past July. Later on, I'll speak to the remaining schedule that takes us through the end of 2021. Next slide. So the area plan we are developing focuses on several key properties located within a defined study area, which you can see on this map using the red boundary. It is largely represented by properties that were historically regulated by that 1976 phase development site plan, but it also includes the large River House property located just outside that PDSP boundary on the west side of Joy Street. The study area, however, excludes the center block where the Costco store is located, as that area is regulated by a separate planning document called the Pentagon Center Phase Development Site Plan, another PDSP, often gets confused, and that document has its own vision and long-term growth strategy that it's currently implementing. Next slide. So one of the initial efforts in establishing an updated vision for Pentagon City involved the creation of core planning principles that would guide the remainder of the process and continue to be utilized in the implementation of the plan once it was adopted. They are strategically limited in number to reflect priorities established through intensive community participation over the last 14 months. But collectively, they emphasize the need to accommodate all modes of travel in support of sustainable development that contribute to a cohesive urban center, welcoming everyone to live, work, learn, and share culture. Next slide. And one more. Thanks. So future growth in Pentagon City will be informed by several key elements which emphasize the public realm improvements and each site's ability to accommodate non-vehicular modes of travel. So in addition to publicly accessible plazas and green pathways, or green ribbons, as they are called in the plan, buildable site boundaries highlight the expectation for future connectivity throughout the study area. The plan also relies on site coverage and massing guidelines to ensure appropriate scale of development while maintaining a certain level of flexibility. Next slide. So as Pentagon City grows over the next several decades, it is anticipated that sites within the study area could contribute as much as 10 million additional square feet of development. As that occurs, the area's land use mix would evolve into including more residential uses, while generally accommodating a similar percentage of hotel and commercial uses as we see today. It is important to note, though, that these figures are predicated on several assumptions, and most importantly, market conditions, which we all know may change over time and may require regular monitoring to ensure the accuracy of our forecasts for this area. Next slide. One of the more critical aspects of this plan is its focus on enhancing everyone's access to open space. So this is achieved by establishing several public plazas and utilizing the green ribbon pathway as a connective thread through multiple private properties. Just as importantly, the relocation of Joy Street onto the River House property will also help set the stage for future master planning efforts for the Virginia Highlands Park that could benefit from an additional 1 acre of park space. Next slide. Beyond the publicly accessible spaces we just looked at, each property will also be subject to specific site standards that ensure Pentagon City redevelops in a cohesive way. So this approach further commits each property to contribute planted areas with vegetation that support the human connection to nature, commonly referred to as biophilia. Using these elements, the next slide gives you a sense of just one way in which some of those sites could redevelop according to the draft plan. Next slide. So the footprints shown here in white represent redevelopment opportunities that could begin to implement the updated vision for Pentagon City. The beige colored buildings represent just existing structures that would remain. Again, these are just illustrative exhibits. They're not meant to be regulatory in nature, very similar to other exhibits that are found in the plan that really are intended to assist with the visualization of just how the area can transform according to the plan. So based on regular discussions with key stakeholders and property owners, our understanding is that portions of the River House property, which you can see here in the yellow boundary, the Fashion Center site, and the Brookfield block located just north of 12th Street could represent some of those initial projects, assuming the plan is ultimately approved and those conversations proceed moving forward. Next slide. In exchange for access to that density we just looked at, the sites within the study area will be expected to make strategic contributions to this area. The draft plan continues to refine what this means for each property and, to the degree possible, also highlight whether or not the improvements are anticipated in the near term or further into the future as long-term implementation strategies. Our goal is to highlight expectations for opportunities where minor improvements may also occur, as some sites may simply incrementally contribute to that long-term vision for Pentagon City, even in the absence of major redevelopment. So those are all things that we're continuing to evolve as the draft plan is refined further. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to hand things off to my DES colleagues to discuss the transportation area in greater detail.
All right, great. Thank you, Matt. To cover the transportation chapter, Michelle Stafford and I will go back and forth a little bit, but I'll go ahead and start. So our transportation section, an analysis started off with a traffic model, a fairly traditional traffic model that gave us some baseline information from which to work off of. Basically, the trip budget that was produced by the traffic model, looking at, vehicle capacity on the streets, showed that with existing mode shares, Pentagon City streets start to see congestion problems after about 20% more development is layered above what's already planned. So that tells us that the status quo isn't really acceptable beyond that point. And since there's a community of vision here that would call for more development than that, it tells us that essentially we have to get a lot more people out of cars as all of these new buildings happen than current planning would suggest would happen. So most of the rest of the report focuses on basically what we can do in order to support that baseline condition. So of course that means we need infrastructure and urban design that better serves other modes. We need TDM, site plan review, other county policies that set the stage and set expectations and prevent defaulting back to old ways. So let's go ahead with a little bit more detail. This slide essentially illustrates Arlington's experience historically that more buildings don't have to equal more traffic, right? What you're looking at here are the orange and blue bars show the development square footage in Pentagon City over time, during a series of years. And the dotted line is vehicular traffic in the Pentagon City area. And you can see very clearly that the trend that traffic actually decreased despite big jumps in building density. So as a result, we know that we need to be able to prevent that dotted line from rising the same way the bar rises, right? We also know that that's realistic, that we can do it with the right set of policies and infrastructure. So now we'll talk about what we think are the right set of policies and infrastructure. We start off with the pedestrian analysis. This is really, really important. Pedestrians, to be honest, are the key mode, as you folks know. We talk about TOD. Transit is obviously an anchor, makes the whole thing possible. We talk about bicycles. They're extremely, extremely important. But just in terms of statistics, in terms of the most number of trips that people are making, the pedestrian infrastructure, the ability of Pentagon City to carry people on foot is, extremely critical to the entire plan. Most of the trips that we can convert from car to other modes are foot. So partly that's just how trips are defined, right? You know, you have a transit trip, and if someone is walking to the metro, well, every transit trip starts with another trip to reach the transit stop, and usually in Pentagon City, that's walking. So partly it's just a matter of definitions, but it's also people buying coffee or lunch or whatever, you know, whatever it is that they're doing in their daily needs that accounts for really the majority of trips, right? We think about commuting a lot, but most trips are not commute trips. And so we want those trips in particular to be on foot as much as possible within Pentagon City. So there's some analysis built around that. First, just a couple of very basic GIS exercises. You see here the map with the green maps radial distance from 12th and Hayes. You know, the green indicates it's within a quarter-mile walk. The other colors indicate longer distances. There's another map that's not shown here that was a gap analysis in the existing sidewalk inventory, just some basic set the baseline things like that. And then we have this intersection density analysis that I do want to talk a little bit about, which is the map on the right with the circles. And essentially intersection density is very frequently used as a proxy for overall walkability. Everyone remembers their Jane Jacobs, right? Like, I guess we're virtual. I can't make you raise your hands, but you remember your Jane Jacobs. The denser the intersections are, the closer together, the more of them there are in a given area. Generally speaking, the easier it is to walk through that area, and car traffic is more controlled and easier to cross if you are a pedestrian or a bicyclist. And so, of course, that's not the only factor in walkability. There's, you know, tons of other factors, urban design, all sorts of things. But in terms of analysis, this is really useful because it's a great proxy tool that allows us to sort of gauge the walkability of an area with one simple tool. So what you're looking here is you see the map of circles that shows a potential future, right? Where the red circles are existing intersections, the purple circles would be new intersections following construction of a new street grid as proposed in this plan. And the basic story here is that adding in a tighter grid of streets, which Michelle will talk about in just a second, doesn't just add capacity to the street network, of course it does, but it also moves a lot of trips out of cars onto the sidewalks and the bike lanes, because those walking and biking trips can be more direct, they can be more interesting, they have easier street crossings, all compared to the sort of super block approach to Pentagon City as exists today. So of course, you know, we need the right sidewalk design standards. The plan lays those out, and primarily those will be achieved via the site plan process. There could be some county capital projects, but you know, we're looking at mostly site plans. So with that pedestrian stage having been set, I want to turn over to Michelle to cover the next couple of slides.
Thank you. Thanks. The draft plan calls for a variety of routes referred to as the street and path network. This includes sidewalks alongside streets, network of green ribbon paths that Matt spoke about, and other additional pathways throughout the study area to be provided at least every 500 feet, building on the density of the intersections that Dan displayed on the previous slide. 2 specific revisions to the Master Transportation Plan's street typology map are recommended to facilitate this street and path network vision. The first is a reclassification of 12th Street South between Eads and Hayes from a neighborhood local street to a type A arterial, primarily retail-oriented mixed use, which is the peach designation on the map. This would be consistent with the planned Transitway Capital project and planned development on either side of this segment of 12th Street. The second recommended revision is to extend the area in striped dark blue that you see in that tiny little map, which is a clip of our MTP map, which is designated for new streets. We would like to extend it to the west to include the Fashion Center, Pentagon Row, West Post, and River House properties. This revision to our MTP map will set in policy the need for new streets across these sites, though the exact locations will be determined through the redevelopment process over time. Next slide, please. This map illustrates the vision for a larger network of routes that one may walk across the study area, including pedestrian connections along the Green Ribbon Network. Again, some of the final locations will be determined through the development process for individual sites and blocks. The dotted lines and public access ways terminology convey flexibility in the alignment and design to account for additional feasibility and investigation work needed in the future to sort of nail down the exact specifics. Next slide, please. We lost our chair. I wanted to highlight the inclusion of the planned future bus station on Army Navy Drive and the realigned South Joyce Street at the River House property that Matt spoke of earlier, facilitating Joyce Street connecting at a signalized intersection where the pharmacy is currently, and the expansion of public parklands. Next slide, please. While we don't have time to review the matrix of recommendations for each street corridor in the study area, I wanted to share that they are in the draft report and they provide high-level guidance to what these streets might look like in the future to accommodate growth and shifting of modes choice to non-auto options by ensuring a network of inviting choices for walking and biking on our streets and to access public transit amenities. We have received a fair amount of feedback and are working to incorporate some of these ideas into the next draft while balancing the need for certainty with flexibility. I would also highlight that some of these street corridors will require additional further study to consider reconfiguration or reallocation of space, which the study does not preclude, but does not prescribe. We particularly know there is need for a study for South Hayes with the many competing needs for curb space and improvements to pedestrian and bicycle facilities, transit and other bus operations, pickup and drop off, and potentially rethinking the median, which we know is riddled with constraints due to being on top of the Metro Rail tunnel. Basically, there is an awful lot going on in Hayes that will require a closer look in its own right. Next slide, please.
Okay, I think this one is back to me again. So, transit is obviously very important to a transit-oriented development neighborhood. Our transit analysis starts with an overview of existing ridership trends. And so, essentially noting the need for more metro riders and the capacity of the system to accommodate them. So what you're looking at here, you see this chart. It shows ridership over time at the Pentagon City Metro Station. At its peak in, I think it was 2011, there were over 16,000 riders per day there. Then we're all familiar with some of the system-wide declines that WMATA faced over the next few years. They certainly affected Pentagon City. And then just before COVID hit, we started seeing some reversal of that, some ridership rises again. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, ridership cratered. But we have this regional system. Of course, we still want to use it. Of course, we need fair paying riders to support operations. Of course, no one knows how fast riders will come back after COVID, but in a long-term plan, we can make some long-term assumptions that hopefully a lot of them will, although the balance of commuters versus other users could end up being different. So we modeled the Metro Rail ridership impact of the development levels that are proposed for Pentagon City that Matt spoke about earlier. And we used a WMATA modeling tool, assuming pre-COVID ridership rates, which we know is well, we don't know what rates to use, if not that, frankly. So following this model, we get about 8,600 new Metro Rail riders per day coming from the development that's proposed here at Pentagon City on top of existing development. And so this is it's a rudimentary model. It's not as sophisticated as some other computer models, but it does provide the potential scale of impact, right? And this is pretty good news, right? That's a lot of riders, 8,600. There's station and system capacity to accommodate that many. But if we got them, we would have a very healthy, very robust metro rail station. So we also looked, fix my little cursor here. We also looked a lot at the bus network, right? Buses are incredibly important in Pentagon City as well. We have both public and private buses operating in Pentagon City. I will talk about them both. Let's do public first. So the map at right with the sort of orange circles shows ridership at WMATA and ART transit bus stops in Pentagon City. The larger the circle, the more riders there are. So what you clearly can see here is the importance of 12th and Hayes and the connection to Metro Rail to bus ridership in Pentagon City, right? The overwhelming majority of bus riders in this neighborhood are using those stops right at the corner of 12th and Hayes, right? There's a cluster of bus stops right there. And it's actually, if we looked at the exact numbers, which I'm sorry, they're too small to read on the slide. There's actually more bus riders at those stops at 12th and Hayes than there are at some metro rail stations in Northern Virginia and even in Arlington. So it's a tremendous number of transit riders. And that's, this analysis is pre-COVID riders. It doesn't even cover what might happen with completion of the Columbia Pike Premium Transit Network or the 12th Street Transitway. That's built into our analysis of needs, but it's just not shown on this map. So, of course, those are going to add more concentration to 12th and Hayes. So what this tells us is that buses are, not only critical, but they absolutely need to be as close to 12th and Hayes as possible, lest we lose a lot of riders, right? There are other riders in Pentagon City. There are some, those stops up on Army Navy Drive are getting a lot of use. There's some of the stops over near Crystal City are getting a lot of use. But if it's harder to get from the bus to the metro, we're going to lose a tremendous number of bus riders and possibly metro riders as well. So we very, very much don't want to do that. We very, very much need to keep those bus stops as close to the corner of 12th and Hayes as possible. Private buses work a little bit differently. So we have hotel and apartment buildings sending shuttles, and they want to be close to the metro, kind of similar to the transit buses. But we have also, of course, tour bus coaches that make up a very large percentage of the private buses in Pentagon City. Those are more about the mall, right? They care more about reaching the mall than reaching the metro system. So they have different needs as a result of that. Their main need, of course, is to have pickup and drop off close to the mall, and specifically close to the front entrance of the mall, meaning Hayes Street. But they don't necessarily have to be right at the corner of 12th, the way that the transit buses do. And pickup and drop off is not the same as staging, right? A lot of those buses currently stay there for a long time. They drop off their people. The buses sit there on Hayes Street for an hour or however long they sit there, and then their people come back out and get back on the bus and the bus drives away. So that staging activity does not necessarily have to happen on Hayes Street. And so one of the recommendations of the plan is that rather than having the tour buses, park there, fight over spaces, keep them as long as they possibly can, have them load and unload on Hayes, and then move somewhere else nearby to wait. Essentially have a cell phone lot for coach buses. We don't have a location found for that yet. It's tabbed for future study. We know there are other bus parking areas in Pentagon City. We know there's some bus parking like on 15th Street south of the mall. Currently, that's essentially spillover from Hayes. What we'd really like to see is that Hayes used for pickup and drop off, and then other areas used for staging and waiting. But all of that said, we know that Hayes has a number of issues, but one particularly serious problem that's come up in the analysis, and that's conflicts at the curb. Competition for curb space, not only among buses, but among other uses, right? We have buses, we have people on bicycles, we have pickup and drop off, both of trucks and ride hailing, all competing and crossing over each other for that very limited curb space near 12th and Hayes. Those very nicely painted green bike lanes that the county installed, we know that because of that crossover conflict, they're not as successful as we might wish that they could be. So another recommendation that's coming out of the plan is to try and disentangle all of those competing uses from the curb. Give bicycle users a protected bikeway, move tour bus layover and staging off of Hayes to a cell phone staging area. Consider if that median curb is usable for any other modes. It may be, it may not be. We don't know at this stage whether it is or not. And so, we don't necessarily have precise solutions yet, but we are starting to have a focus on what some of the big problems are. And this study will generate recommendations to do, as Michelle said, a follow-up Hayes specific study that can look in more detail. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Michelle to cover a couple of slides.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about the bike network. As part of our analysis of the bike network and bike facility needs in the study area, my colleague Leah, I worked with, who performed a comfort level analysis of the existing and potential bike facilities within the study area, taking into account the constraints at play, which include the fact that the Costco site is actually not part of the study. We got a lot of feedback on this, which was really a tool that we've found to be helpful in our analysis. And some of the feedback included the need to connect this map with ongoing work in the Crystal City Bike Network effort. Next slide, please. Concurrently, the consultants, Goody Clancy, worked to provide a bike map for this study area that shows both bike facilities and the Green Ribbon Network. We know that bikes will be using those paths, though the paths will be designed for pedestrian comfort and for slower moving bike connections. For example, connecting to a final destination or for bike parking or providing an option for less confident cyclists. We're working with the consultants to revise this map to make corrections and illustrate the nearby facilities in Crystal City and the connections to existing planned bike facilities outside of the study area that connect to the region, such as the Mount Vernon Trail, Joy Street connecting to Columbia Pike, Long Bridge, etc. All this to say, this map we will be advancing as our one map, and we look forward to sharing a revised version of it soon. Next slide, please. The report makes connections to the efforts of the Vision Zero policy and the action plan the county has undertaken. There are known vehicle and bicycle crash hotspots located within the study area, which coincide with capital projects focused on safety, namely the Army-Navy Drive Complete Streets project. As well, the Vision Zero Action Plan identifies Hayes Street as a high injury network, which dovetails with our recommendation for a separate study for Hayes. Back to you, Dan.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so the TDM and parking section is developed with heavy input from ACCS. It starts with most of our typical recommendations for TDM. I'm not going to walk you through what those are. Rather, I'm going to focus on some of the changes that we think will take TDM further in Pentagon City than it's able to go in other parts of the county. Most importantly, the plan is recommending a shift from a prescriptive model to a performance model of TDM. And what that means is that rather than saying site plans must provide the following list of TDM things, XYZ, it says use this toolbox of TDM things to achieve mode split targets, right? And so this is a key change, and it's brought about by the recognition that basically changing technology can render some of those older prescriptive TDM requirements obsolete. So, we might require preloaded smart trip cards in a TDM requirement today, but with telework and with the next generation fares coming online, preloaded smart trip cards may have less impact than they used to. So it's better to focus on outcomes rather than process, right? And the entire point of the process is to reduce SOV mode share. So let's latch onto that target and give people a toolbox that they can use to reach the target rather than focusing on so much on the tools. So that said, there would still be both carrots and sticks in this approach. There would be carrots like memberships, fare payments, parking cash outs. There would be sticks like parking maximums and fees. At this stage, the study isn't yet too specific, but we can talk a little bit about mode splits. There would be mode splits for different land uses. I think the most critical one that's proposed is the 30% that you see there, SOV mode split for offices and residential. It's important to note that that's a proposed starting point. Basically, that 30% would ramp down every decade or so as more aggressive targets become achievable. And the purpose here is to essentially identify the most aggressive target possible that while still being achievable. Right, so achievability is important because we want these TDM requirements to have teeth, right? If we could put out a number that's completely unachievable and say meet it or else, and what would that actually mean, right? We want this to be meaningful and be enforceable, so we need it to be incremental as well. This would be implemented via a new standard site plan condition for TDM that would lay out the mode targets, that would lay out a process for updating the targets periodically, that would lay out a process for reporting performance of buildings that have been built annually or every 2 years, something like that. And then it would lay out penalties for not meeting the mode splits. Penalties could be payments to ACCS. At this stage, that's not worked out yet. Right? We don't actually have what that new standard site plan condition would be, but there's a clear recommendation to develop one. And so that would be a follow-up product to this study. All right, so let's advance to the next slide. So just to summarize a little bit, we have a community vision here that calls for very significant redevelopment. We have a traffic model that tells us we really can't rely on the status quo to accommodate all of the travel that we know will happen as a result of the redevelopment. And so therefore we need mode shift. And we therefore have recommendations that support that shift by improving the pedestrian network, including the green ribbon, by implementing an aggressive bike network with protected bikeways, an entire network of them, with transit priority and a focus on buses and access to metro, with TDM parking, curbside policies that support mode shift, with individual street and safety recommendations. And I encourage you to look on the website at that table that we don't have time during the meeting to walk you through every piece of, but it's good information. With development conditions that require these tools in order to gain access to that additional density, and potentially county capital projects to support what can be done by site plan. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Matt to close out.
Great, thank you. Next slide. And there we go. So I'm just going to briefly wrap things up. We only have three slides left. And as we continue to refine the draft plan, it is important to note that some of the key implementation actions that will be considered by the county board in support of this plan. This involves several strategic changes to the general land use plan, master transportation plan, as Michelle noted earlier, and also the zoning ordinance. Some of this information was originally highlighted back in July, but with each version of the plan, as it evolves, we'll include further details on exactly how this will look, as well as other recommendations intended to support or implement the Pentagon City Plan. Next slide. So beyond several engagements that took place this past summer, staff has also begun initial briefings this past month to raise awareness of the plan and also solicit feedback as it begins to evolve later into this year. The next version of the plan is expected to be released in just about a week and will be followed by a virtual open house scheduled for October 12th from 6 to 8 p.m. Many additional briefings are also being considered or have already been scheduled during the months of October and November, and we're going to continue those, tracking them on our website for the planning study. Next slide. And then finally, there is an emerging theme here that while we are updating the vision for Pentagon City and highlighting a lot of aspects of what that involves and how some sites may actually redevelop, several important elements will require additional analysis beyond the current process. So this slide gives you a sense of what we've identified to date through our study in terms of various topics that staff will need to revisit following the adoption of the plan as we continue to monitor progress and implement the plan moving forward. And with that, I think the next slide is really to conclude staff's presentation, and happy to take any questions or comments.
Great. Thank you very much for an excellent presentation. If Commissioner Buck is interested, I'm inclined to jump straight to him, as he's been our liaison on the focus group here, to give us any additional context from his point of view on the process to date.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? I don't know that I want to provide much additional context. You probably won't want to hear what context I want to provide. I'd love to just get into Q&A and ask first. This kicked off 14 months ago. It was a study that was focusing, I don't remember the exact word, focusing to a large degree on the transportation network. 14 months later, we have one sort of future promise to study a lane reduction on Hayes. We have no projects queued up to improve safety or to reduce lanes anywhere else. We do not have a transportation consultant working on this. We have a lot of good yeoman staff work from Ms. Stafford and Mr. Moloff. I guess that's my context. I guess I have so many issues with this plan that I don't even know where to start. I'll pass it to somebody else.
All righty. Oh, I thought somebody else had their hand up, and now I'm not seeing it. All right, while we're waiting on that, I just wanted to jump into, I had a question that I raised back at the office hours Q&A, and I still haven't quite gotten an answer to, which is the inclusion of 13th Street as a potential protected bike facility in the bike network going forward. And like what the thinking is there, given that a large portion of 13th Street already exists and it doesn't exactly have a lot of extra space in it. Can somebody speak to that?
I can take a crack at it, and my colleagues can jump in if there's anything to add. We are working with the consultants to revise that drawing, and we'll be removing that segment. There was no dispute about that, and staff concur. That was a consultant level decision, and staff agreed with it. There will be other changes to that map as well, as we're moving kind of from these analytical tools into sort of a consolidated one map approach for what we can expect for bikes in the study area. And as we got a lot of feedback about making sure we're clearly identifying the connections in Crystal City and to the regional bike facility network.
Great, and I know there's a really great sort of goal laid out at the beginning of the study document about being able to get to within a block of everywhere in Pentagon City on low stress bike facilities. Is that still going to be achievable without 13th Street, given the fact that 12th Street was also not really called out for low stress facilities in the existing map? Are things shifting or changing there?
We would identify 14th Street as a low stress facility based on the anticipated volumes. It may not be a protected facility, but given the street design through Metropolitan Park, 14th may be more comfortable with without the presence of the truck loading and those kind of activities we see on 13th Street. Without getting into sort of a block by block, that is certainly a high level goal we hope to achieve.
Great, thank you. I think my next question is about TDM. This was a hugely improved and useful presentation about the TDM section in this document. I have much better grasp on what we're talking about now than the original document. But is this shift in how we approach TDM something the county is expecting to move to county-wide? Or just in Pentagon City, or Pentagon City to begin with, and then eventually countywide?
Well, we don't have our TDM staff here, but the way that this, their understanding and our understanding goes is that essentially the last thing you said, this would begin in Pentagon City. We think that it will go well. It matches best practices going forward that are emerging today. But, we don't have as much experience doing things this way as we have had doing things the old prescriptive way. So, we can't promise that we would then take it to other parts of the county if it turns out to not be as successful as we think it will be. But if it is successful in Pentagon City, it could be implemented in at least other metro station areas. It may not work everywhere in the county, but it could be replicable in some other parts of it. Michelle, do you have anything to add?
Okay. Just to limit expectations that there will be a process to develop new site plan language, which is again one of these follow-on items that the study itself doesn't specify, and there's an entire process for that. So it may take some time to work out the formal language for it.
Great. All right, we got a bunch of commissioner hands up now all of a sudden, so I'm going to jump to some other folks. Commissioner Price, you're up first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to slightly piggyback on what the chairman has just said about TDM, one of the things that jumped out at me again, I'm very admirable. It's a good plan. I don't know what Darren's experiences with this was, but it seemed based on reading it that it's a good plan, at least a good start. One of the things that jumped out at me was the idea of mode shift. I guess you're trying to get people out of their single occupancy vehicles onto bikes and to be pedestrians and to get onto transit. But with all this development, we need, to me, it just begs the question of to get people out of their cars means to get people out of their cars and not to attract cars. And one of the big attractors of that area is that the availability of parking. Is there, I guess, a countywide effort to go to reduce parking minimums? That seems to be, with all this development, kind of a good start. You want to start with the development, let's get rid of parking minimums that are throughout the county. Otherwise, we're just, we need, in my opinion, more of a sticker approach than a carrot, because history speaks that the carrots most often don't work. So there needs to be some sort of a stick here. And I think parking minimums fall into that category. I'll get off my soapbox now.
We agree. The TDM section of the plan supports that in principle. County parking requirements have been steadily decreasing and continue to decrease, both as a result of county policy and as a result of market conditions. Developers know they don't need as much parking as they used to. We are beginning to discuss the possibility of parking maximums in this plan. We would love to see that here. I feel like a little bit of a broken record saying we don't have that yet, but we have a policy framework to propose it and come up with more of the specifics later. This plan is very general. Right. So you can see for example, the street network and the bike network, there's a lot of things that are proposed there, but they're not engineered at even a conceptual level yet. And so, we do need to set the expectation that this is a conceptual plan in terms of both infrastructure and policy. So we agree with you.
Great. Commissioner Muradovic, you're up next.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I had a, so looking through the presentation and looking kind of at that intersection of South and Hayes, it kind of reminds me in terms of potential of like a European downtown where, and one thing that you notice about those is that a lot of those are closed off to vehicular traffic. And I know you mentioned some potential lane reductions out there, but there's a lot of space there. There's like 3 lanes, I believe, going in each direction. I was wondering what you all were thinking about in terms of reducing perhaps the ability to drive into that area, or at least have come off that off ramp and go down to 12th. And somehow, I mean, I know it might cause some bottlenecks, but it would definitely free up a lot of space for the buses. And so like I didn't really see, I kind of like did a search through the presentation for lane reduction and whatnot, but nothing came up. So I was hoping you could speak to that a bit.
I can give a stab. We aren't prescribing lane reductions because we're identifying the need for further study, and we certainly want to not layer on another capital project change on Hayes that wouldn't be effective because it hadn't been studied and considered carefully enough. We do understand there's an incredible competition for curb space among a variety of different types of vehicles, and we're kind of calling out the need to rethink Hayes, but without prescribing the exact how, because it is worthy of its own study. So I'm not trying to say we would never support lane reductions or reallocation, only that we can't say exactly what that looks like. The median itself has caused kind of a lot of heartburn because it has a lot of components for functional elements of the metro tunnel beneath it. There's limits to what kind of weight can go there. This is a full planning, transportation analysis, and engineering consideration. So I think we'll see that as a major outcome of the study.
All right, thank you. Yeah, perhaps lane reduction wasn't the best term to use. It would be lane repurposement away from individual cars to buses. But yeah, thank you for your response.
We certainly feel that buses are of the utmost priority on Hayes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ludlow, you're up. Oh, wait, Commissioner Melliff, were you trying to jump in there? No? Okay. Commissioner Ludlow, you're up next.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks to staff and the consultants. I thought the report, the initial plan was well done and framed most of the critical issues. Clearly, the Pentagon City area is going to accommodate a lot of growth in the future, both residential and commercial and office. The question I have is really related to maybe some of what Dan Maloof was explaining about the forecasting for the area. It's really difficult right now to know what the post-COVID universe is really going to look like. I mean, we've seen a massive shift to e-commerce, more home-based, fewer home-based shopping trips, more people working from home. To what degree have we maybe surveyed employers to understand how we're recalibrating to work in post-COVID? As somebody who administers a group in Washington, D.C., we're envisioning kind of a scenario where we're about 40% of what we used to be, which is a common number I've heard. So just wanted to know if you had any insights on that in terms of the forecasting for this area and other parts of the county. Thank you.
In terms of surveying employers, the county's Commuter Services Bureau does regular reach out surveying. To be frank, I would have to reach out to them to get the latest information, and we'll be happy to do that. We can do some projecting, right? We know that telework will be more of a thing in the future than it was in the past, right? So we can forecast that the peak of the peak during rush hour probably won't reach that same peak, at least not for a number of years. But we've seen much shallower declines on non-commute related transit trips, right? There have been COVID related declines for those, but they're not nearly as steep as the commute trip declines have been. And ridership on Metro is rebounding now, and ridership on Metro bus is never dipped as far down and is also rebounding. So, we're able to, at the very least, project shallower peaks, lower peaks during rush hour, but still need for non-rush hour trips. And one of the things that reflects that in this plan is the land use balance and the assumption of trip generation in terms of office uses versus residential uses, right? So in the past, there was a lot of office buildings in Pentagon City and Crystal City. We had a lot of people coming in as commuters. In the future, there will be, well, I don't know, I don't want to say there'll be less of that as a raw total, but there will be less of that as a percentage and more people who live in the neighborhood using the Metro, maybe to go to work, but also, to go to lunch in Potomac Yards, or, to see a friend who lives in Roslyn, or things like that. So
less of a net reduction, but a shift in trip purpose.
For sure, a shift in trip purpose. We hope less of a net reduction.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bros, you're up next.
Can I jump in, Chair Slat? Could you put me in the queue? My hand raise function and my chat function are not operating at all.
You got it. I'll put you on the list.
Thank you. Sorry, Commissioner Bros.
No worries. Thank you, Chair Slat. Thanks again to the county and the staff for putting together this, and the folks that participated in it. And it feels like it raises a lot more questions than it answers. But I think the effort is really, obviously prompted by Amazon 2. And as anyone knows, and I've certainly spent a lot of time in that area, both taking the Metro there, driving to Costco, bicycling, and even on the scooter around the area. It's a tight area already, and just watching those Amazon 2 building go up, it seems like it's getting tighter and tighter. So I applaud the sort of efforts at the end goal, where I think we're trying to reduce certainly the number of cars, and I echo Commissioner Price, and how can we minimize that, because it's going to just continue to be a very difficult place to drive through. So really looking forward to those multimodal efforts in terms of moving forward. But also with Commissioner Morodovic thinking about, is there more opportunity for walking spaces, closing walking malls? It's again, I know a really limited real estate, as it were, but where is it that we could possibly look for more of that? Even today, it seems like some of the sidewalks are, constricted, even where there might be opportunities for more widening of those as we look at development. And finally, I was the same as Commissioner Ludlow. What are the COVID impacts? And thanks for responding to that. But that also sort of echoes in my brain now as we see that shift from folks who are not I know they're building, Amazon's building a huge building, but how many people are going to be in that at the end of the day? So anyway, good things to think about. Look forward to more discussions on these topics and what happens going forward.
Great. Commissioner Lynn, tell me, I want to jump to you before we go back to round two with Commissioner Buck.
Thank you. A couple of small things and then the larger thing. First off, I did raise at the county board work session that it is time for the county to move toward parking maximums rather than the current parking minimums. Second, as far as, the bus situation in front of the mall for the tour buses really has been a problem for years. and where to put them. One thing it just really came to me very recently, the parking structure behind the mall, it's too low for coaches at this point, I would assume, but there's nothing below it. Could not at some point, digging down, give the clearance that buses would need? Should that be something that long-term we look for, as that parking structure ends up not being needed as much, hopefully, because people will be using other modes rather than driving? It could be a good place to put those coaches, which won't be going away. Anyway, that's just a comment. Finally, we spent a lot of time talking about Hay Street and what could, can't, or should happen there. The other street that I think we really need to have a lot of attention to is 12th Street. It's an emerging, important street. We're loading up so many things onto that street. And my co-chair, Commissioner Siegel, and I have talked about this. It is the transitway. It is the only cross street between Army Navy and south of the Costco site, so a lot of cars and trucks have to go on it. It's an emerging retail street, so the sidewalks do need to be wider and wide. We want to have trees all along it. That means tree pits and width there. Pickup and drop off is going to be absolutely needed. We would love ideally to have cycle tracks. And then there's always the possibility of parking in a very constrained right of way. One thing that we're not doing as far within this plan is we're not really setting the priorities for how that street should be used. We're going to have a much more robust conversation about how to set the county's priorities for this right of way, which is going to be a really critical east-west corridor. There's tremendous development that's going to be happening along it, that is happening along it, and we have to now really wrestle with this. And I'm not sure that we've really, and because things are happening now, like with the transitway, I'm not sure we've really fully at this point thought through what the priorities are and what's going to have to be sacrificed in order to get what we want in there. So anyway, that's my comment on that. Thank you.
All right, back to Commissioner Buck.
All right, so Commissioner Price asked me what my issue was with this plan. So here we go. Number one, we are saying that the status quo is unacceptable, but the only traffic analysis we've done is to assume that traffic goes up 20% as a sensitivity analysis, and we stop. We do not commit to any lane reductions, and not just Hayes, which is the most egregious example, 8-lane crossing between metro entrances, 8 lanes in an urban city. We have Joyce, where we're going to have the River House development and thousands of people walking across Joyce every day at an uncontrolled intersection down a promenade to get to the metro. We have 15th that serves as a barrier between a retirement home, a rehabilitation center, and all of the amenities that are coming in with HQ2. And we're going to leave that at 5 lanes, 15,000 ADT. 18th Street, the bend between 15th and Hayes, and it goes around the rec center and comes to 18th and Fern. 4 lanes, empty today, empty tomorrow. Serve as it's a third of a mile between intersections, and it's a barrier between Southgate and existing missing middle community and Virginia Highlands Park. We're gonna punt on that as well. What else? The status quo is unacceptable, but we're going to establish as our initial cap on automotive trips the same amount that we've approved with every site plan that's come through this zip code, 30%. How are we not accepting the status quo? That is literally the status quo. Why are we not being more aggressive in setting a trip cap? Let's talk about local streets. We're expanding the MTP map to put more local streets on, but we're not going to do local streets on some of them. We may do pedestrian paths, or we may do green ribbons through those and those sort of address the pedestrian porosity aspect, but how is this a neighborhood transportation plan that we can use? The implication seems to be that every site plan, we will decide whether or not we get streets or green ribbons or alleyways. How is this a guiding plan for how the neighborhood is going to develop when our transportation architecture, the backbone of it, is up for grabs with every site plan? I simply don't understand how, after spending however much to develop the traffic model and 14 months to take in all of our comments, we're left with Hayes has a lot of curbside issues, so we can't commit to anything. 15th hasn't been talked about. Joyce hasn't been talked about. None of these other streets have been talked about. I've been waiting 15 years for a comprehensive plan for this area that deals with the worst thing about Pentagon City, which is our 5-lane minor arterials and our 8-lane crossing between metro stations, and we're just punting. It's kind of unbelievable to me. Transit. We know that Pentagon City Metro is the busiest transportation bus, private shuttle facility. Is any of that service adequate for the growth that we're expecting? We have no insight into the bus frequency, the bus service, where it's going, where people are coming from, whether or not that whether that service is sufficient to address all of this future growth that we're planning in, and that we're insisting we don't want to drive, even though we're leaving all the lanes in place and approving as much trip generation as we have in the past. Bicycling, I mean, you're putting PBLs everywhere except anybody who lives east or west of 12th and Hayes, the epicenter of the community, and you will not be able to ride a bicycle to the metro station from east or west or a micromobility device because parking curbside. To Commissioner Lantelmi's point about 12th Street, it has a lot of future competition, but the one thing that has consistently been on 12th Street has been a multi-use trail, and that is just not in the county's vision anymore for some reason. What else do we have? No roundabouts. I mean, it's in the county's design documents. Consider a roundabout in lieu of signals. Signals delay. Signals take up space. They're expensive. Are we considering roundabouts at any of these minor arterials? And of course, finally, Mr. Leach was in the news today talking about Vision Zero and how our particular corner of Arlington has to rely on development to deliver Vision Zero safety improvements. I heard the word biophilia a couple of times. I've heard a lot about curbside. I haven't seen anything about the prevailing speeds on 15th Street. I haven't seen anything about how those seniors are going to cross to get to that new park at HQ2. I've seen nothing about 15th and Hayes, a 175-foot diagonal intersection, and how we're going to tame that thing. I've heard nothing about how kids at Southgate are going to get to Virginia Highlands Park if there's ever an elementary school there. I'm sorry, but this plan, I can't rely on the next draft being better when you fundamentally haven't answered so many questions about it.
Okay, I can speak to some of that. These are frankly helpful comments. You know, there are as we go through and develop the bike network, we've made a number of tweaks based on suggestions. I know that that's not the only thing you're talking about. In terms of lane reductions, let's talk about that for a minute. The plan does not say we shall reduce the lanes by so many numbers on so many streets, but many of the conceptual recommendations of the plan, such as bikeways on various streets, imply that they may be carried out via lane reductions. The plan doesn't say that. We haven't reached that level of engineering for any of these things. But the working assumption is that some of the bikeways would repurpose existing lanes. We're not putting that in the plan because we haven't actually done any engineering on that yet. It would be improper for us to. In terms of the mode split, 30% being too high, it's the existing status quo. That's what buildings are doing today. You're right, which is why that's the starting point for the mode split, and the plan calls for it to ramp down over time. It's the starting point. It matches the things that are happening today because that's what's achievable today. A few years ago, it wouldn't have been that. There could be room to, modify that a little bit, but the basic strategy is not 30% forever. It's 30% is the starting point that then ramps down. A number of the things that you brought up are addressed in other county documents, and we don't want to be too duplicative of those works. Perhaps the fact that it's not clear is guidance to us that we need to call them out better. We have the county's transit development plan discusses bus frequencies, how those will ramp up over time. The county's Vision Zero plans gives, specific recommendations, not all of which are public, for several of the intersections that you mentioned. Can we incorporate them into this plan or not depends on the ability to, depends on how duplicative we want to be of existing documents and whether things are ripe enough to be made public yet or not. Those are two separate answers for two separate batches of things. Trying to think, what else did you say? I was taking some notes. 12th Street, we recognize there are a lot of issues on 12th Street. We also frequently get the comment that 12th Street cannot be too wide, right? It's going to be one of the main streets for the area. If we make it as wide as Hayes in order to accommodate dedicated space for every mode, that's also not a good outcome. So that is one street in Pentagon City where we're prioritizing transit over the other modes. There is, of course, space on the street for other things besides transit. There's a parking lane right there. We know that in the future, that parking lane is going to be needed for pickup and drop off in order to keep those users from blocking the transit lane. So, we have constraints. There are also a lot of things that we can do that are fair for you to bring up. So, I guess with that, I'll stop talking, but, I think there is, I think that I'm not sure what else to say.
Thank you, Mr. Malouf. I think I want to jump in here because my comments go to a lot of what Commissioner Buck was saying, which is, I think fundamentally, I don't understand why this study seems to have so much less transportation detail than so many other documents that we produce. The Crystal City Sector Plan has proposed future street cross sections. The Roslyn Sector Plan has proposed future street cross sections. Even the Courthouse Square addendum that looked at just that parking lot next to the county building had proposed future street cross sections. So I think my main question is, what's different here? Why do we have this study whose feels like number one overarching conclusion is we can't keep doing what we've been doing transportation wise, or we're going to have too many cars? Why does then this study not have enough transportation analysis to come with those sort of recommendations?
I think that this study area also has a lot of complication with existing capital projects and a lack of appetite to undo a lot of decisions that have their own public processes and advanced an awful lot of engineering work. I would say that's one factor and may impact some of the discomfort on 12th Street. I failed to emphasize the fact that this study does aim for a parallel route to the north of 12th on new 11th Street behind the Brookfield site. And that's something the feedback we got in 12th gave us the teeth that we knew we needed to ask for that. But I also think that the Costco site not being part of the study area is complicating, and the metro tunnel underneath Hayes means we're dealing with an awful lot more than just a street cross section, that I'm uncomfortable making any kind of recommendations without a separate standalone study that considers that engineering factors in light of what we learned through the bioretention facilities that were installed on Hayes and subsequently leaked into the metro system. So like, we don't want to make that mistake by simply presenting some high-level concept that we may not be able to achieve. Now, there's just an awful lot of moving parts with Route 1 changes. I think there's just a lot of discomfort with being too prescriptive and allowing for the site developments to have some flexibility and also give us room to let some of those other projects and efforts kind of come together so that we can make better plans than ones that are too simple or not considering all those factors.
All right, we'll think through that answer. In the meantime, Commissioner Muradovic, you're up next.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to touch on something that I thought Commissioner Buck would talk about, but he had so many other concerns, it seems like, so I'll do it. Kind of moving away from Hayes Street is Mr. Maloof, you talked a lot about intersection density and kind of the goal to transition away from the super blocks, which is something that's in accordance with the existing MTP. But we have a contradiction in that at Penn Place down there. So I was wondering if we could get a comment on how to square that circle, because that's effectively a super block. Now, you know, it might have a ribbon as you all would call it, but that's only pedestrian traffic. So if we could get a little bit more clarification on that, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, well, we agree that ideally there would be through streets at that site. We've been unable to strike that balance in negotiations with that site plan as it moves forward. So if Matt has anything to add, he can. Otherwise, that's really all that I can say.
No, I don't.
All right, you know, I was hoping for a little bit more, but thank you. I mean, it just like a comment. It just seems like county's getting steamrolled by Amazon on that. There's no other take to get from that. I mean, just from the outside looking in. So, yeah, thank you though.
Back to Commissioner Buck.
Sure. So since Amazon has cracked the code and broken the master transportation plan principle of grid connectivity, and that's gone now. Brookfield, we can't enforce a local street on Brookfield. We can't enforce a local street on the mall if that ever redevelops. River House, Green Ribbons. Let's talk about some other places in the county where we can get rid of the grid. So my neighbor's down on Fern, south of 23rd. It's a local yield street. Your traffic analysis for this study shows they're getting upwards of 6,000 cars a day on a local yield street from Route 1 diversion. For about 10 years, they've been asking for some sort of restriction on traffic, on entry, time limited or a one-way conversion, but that's been refused by the county, citing great connectivity. Are we going to reopen that? We also have the master transportation plan, the bike element. It has a whole section on bike boulevards. Doesn't mention volume control or diversion as a tool in the toolbox to create a bike boulevard. Can we put that in the toolbox now? Now that we can get away from doing local street connectivity.
I will say, with respect to Penn Place, I think one of the things you're highlighting there is how connectivity is defined. And I think the ability of the surrounding streets on that major block to be able to be adjusted, as we'll see with that particular site plan, to accommodate that level of activity regardless of the mode. So I think simply because vehicular connections are not being maintained through the site, and other modes of travel are permitted, but to a lesser degree perhaps encouraged, because there are other means or directions that we would rather have them take. I don't think that necessarily means somebody, quote unquote, broke the code or set the stage for something, because in addition to, I think, how they are going to design the perimeter roadways, you also have to consider what's happening on the interior of that block and how similar that can be to any other examples we might see in that area, particularly with the type of 2-acre plus open space that's going to be publicly accessible, and the kind of destination it's going to become with the helix being open to the public, throughout, each month. That represents a very unique circumstance that I think allows us to think a little bit differently than we would have elsewhere. I can't imagine that type of environment is going to be produced simply because maybe an adjacent block is having a small plaza with a green pathway running through it. I think to me, those are apples and oranges. But you're right, it does highlight, I think, important questions we need to consider in terms of where else are we willing to make that trade-off and consider something other than what we typically may have shown, including in our own adopted policies. So it is a complicated question, by no doubt. But I think we are in this process trying to highlight how different that particular destination will be to other areas. So if similar requests come in, that comparison can be made, and we can verify if a similar destination is even being possible. Under what criteria would we evaluate that further if someone else were to, not deliver on the connectivity we're expecting? I don't know if Dan and Michelle have other thoughts on that question.
All right, hearing none, I'm going to jump back in. This has been a great discussion, but I do want to kind of signal to the commissioners that we have a lot of other stuff on the agenda as well. And so let's kind of move into concluding comments and feedback so that we can send these fine folks on their way and get on to the other things. And in that spirit, I did want to provide some additional feedback here at this point. I think I have a few big picture concerns about the way the study document is currently moving. The first is the amount of flexibility that we are providing on the new street grid. Pedestrian connectivity is great, and I agree with Mr. Maloff's point about intersection density being very important from a pedestrian standpoint. But I think it's also very important from dealing with, that 20% or 30% or 15% or whatever of trips that are happening still by vehicle coming out of these buildings. I think we probably need to be a little bit less flexible and a little bit more specific about some of these new streets being streets and not arcades or pedestrian trails or something like that, just to make sure that we can have parking garage entrances and exits, that allow people to go east or west before they get to an arterial street and aren't doing 3 right turns to finally get on an arterial going the direction that they want to go, or we're going to, we're not going to have more development without more traffic, because we're just going to make people drive extra out of their way due to the lack of connectivity. Second, I'm really still concerned about bike connectivity, specifically that this plan still doesn't commit to a low stress connection all the way through on 15th. I know that Pentagon Center is not part of this. And so there's not a lot of opportunity to get additional right-of-way in part of that stretch of 15th Street. But I think, there is parking on good bunches of it today. And this may need to be one of those spots where we say, we're going to get a protected facility. And the implication is that, there's going to have to be a reallocation to make that happen. 14th isn't going to go through, very far to the east. It's not going to go through very far to the west. 15th Street is the chance there. And I will note that the gap between 14th Street and the new 11th Street / Green Ribbon, whatever gets through Penn Place, is extremely large. 12th continues to be this glaring, obvious, if low stress bike connectivity were possible on 12th Street. And I think it is if we sharpen our pencils and recognize that, transit and bikes can both be a priority. It's just, some other modes that might have to lose a bit there. I think it makes the plan look very pretty. And it actually gets us to what we say we're trying to achieve. Did I have a third thing? I felt like I had a third thing in my head, and now I can't think of what it was. No, all right, I'm going to go to somebody else, and if I think of it, I know where to find you all. Any other commissioners have some final concluding feedback, comments, last lingering question, anything like that? Commissioner Muradovic.
Yeah, I'm sorry to be taking up a lot of the space for the third time, but going back to Penn Place again, yes, so there is going to be connectivity, bike connectivity, pedestrian connectivity, but the concern that I have, and I don't know how this will play out, is that is essentially a private corporate-owned space. It's not a public space. And, what restrictions will be there? Are people going to get stopped by security for rolling by on a skateboard? Am I not going to be able to bike through there at 2 a.m. at night? All of these things that you're allowed to do on a public space, there's a potential for the owner to impose restrictions. So, I mean, there is a way where all of this works out somehow, but I think there are so many landmines in having the county cede this authority to a private entity, and I mean, I hope that a lot of these things will be resolved, but I don't know how. So that is my concern. Thank you.
All right, and seeing no other commissioner hands, unless Commissioner Lantelmi has something. I know his hand can't go up anymore. No, he's shaking his hand. Commissioner Buck.
I just wanted to second Commissioner Muradovic. I think providing public protest space at the Amazon campus is part of our responsibility. I think another benefit of local streets is if 12th Street becomes congested, banning left turns by cars is a good way to take a phase out of the cycle someday if it's necessary. And you can't do that if cars can't make a right on any of the local streets and circle back. So just another way that we are limiting our flexibility in the future and leaving it in the hands of developers to make that decision for us.
All right, seeing no other hands, thank you very much, Mr. Maliff and Ms. Stafford and Mr. Matuzek for coming in early at our request so that we could have this conversation before the next iteration of the study document comes out. And we will see you in a month or two when we get closer to adoption.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the feedback.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So next on the agenda, we have School Zone, Slow Zone with Christine Baker, and it's an action item.
Thank you so much, Bridget. Pulling up a presentation right now. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Christine Sherman Baker. I am the Vision Zero Program Manager, and I'm here today to talk about demonstration slow zones and what we are proposing to the board. So tonight I'll just go over the purpose and need for the slow zones, how we are setting the speed limits and delineating them, what the signs and the pavement markings will look like within the slow zones. We'll go over the proposed demonstration locations and maps, and then we'll wrap up with data and feedback collection and the tentative timeline. So slower speeds around schools is a no-brainer. It's beneficial for everyone. Our data shows that 1 in 4 crashes in Arlington involve speeding, and every year there are over 10 crashes involving speeding around schools. We all know the risk of severe injuries and deaths increases as vehicle speed increases, and overall we want to prioritize safety in school zones because children are still learning how to travel safely. They're still learning how to cross the street, how to bike. So there are some of our most vulnerable users. So creating new school zone guidelines is recommended in the Vision Zero Action Plan. And school zone guidelines will set standards for speed limits, the typical signage, crosswalks, pavement markings, and other aspects that you would see within the built environment within 600 feet of school access points. So not just the school itself, but ways that, critical access points to get to the school. As part of those guidelines, we're planning to make all school zone speed limits at 20 or 25 miles per hour, either dynamically using beacons around arrival and dismissal times. So that's the flashing beacons where the speed limit changes when flashing, and then statically using new permanent slow zones. So that's what we're here to talk about tonight. These static permanent slow zones that will be 20 miles per hour on neighborhood streets. And the reason that we're doing demonstrations is to test the proposed school zone guidelines in a few locations and see how they work before we finalize those guidelines and apply them countywide. So as I mentioned, on arterial streets within 600 feet of school access points, that's where we're proposing the dynamic speed limit. So it's a sign that flashes and the speed limit changes at the arrival and the dismissal times. Then for the local and neighborhood streets, that's where we're just proposing it's a blanket speed limit, 20 miles per hour all the time, delineated with a standard school sign. And then as far as looking into kind of what the characteristics are within those zones, we'll have the speed limit sign selected. So it's at entry points to the slow zone, as well as, areas where someone could turn off a side street and enter in the middle of the slow zone. So there's that extra signage there where they'll be able to, clearly see the speed limit is 20 miles per hour. We'll also have the new orange signs over top of the speed limits, just to let people know they're new. It draws extra attention to the eye. And we're also planning to add 20-mile-per-hour pavement markings, like you see in this graphic here. You may have seen this is in a few other places in the county. For example, coming off of 50 onto 10th Street North, you see this speed limit, and that's worked well in helping to reduce speeds as you come off of a higher speed facility to a lower speed facility. So we're going to test those out in the slow zones as well. And then we'll have school crossing signs for the crosswalks and high visibility markings at our crosswalks within the areas too. And then the last little piece of this, which is a little nuanced, is where we are proposing some of the new slow zones, there are already beacons there. So the way it's currently set up is that the speed limit goes down during arrival and dismissal times and goes back up. But on those neighborhood streets where we're proposing the permanent slow zone, we'll keep the beacons because it's expensive infrastructure just to rip out. So we're going to leave that there and just remove the when flashing. So it gives an extra indication to the driver to slow down, but it's no longer just the speed limit reduction during the flashing arrival dismissal times. So we're proposing the demonstrations at 13 locations. And they're for a variety of different reasons. The first 4 slow zones are actually areas where the existing beacons are at the end of their lifespan. So we need to update those beacons. And in a lot of those cases, we had to kind of move things around because we were, testing out the new guidelines. So they became a natural area to kind of start to look at the slow zones and propose changes. So that includes Tuckahoe Elementary and Bishop O'Connell High School because they're right next to each other. So that's a natural large school slow zone around those 2 schools. Glebe Elementary, Wakefield and Claremont Elementary, again, right adjacent to each other. So kind of a large school slow zone around those schools. And then St. Thomas More. We also identified 3 schools because of Vision Zero's commitment to equity. So these are schools that are near the high injury network and identified within the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments equity emphasis areas. So that's Huffman Boston Elementary, Gunston Middle, and Drew Elementary. And then we also have lots of new schools coming in Arlington or school swaps. So all the schools within that new school working group were identified as well because we're assessing those school zones as those schools are experiencing changes this year. So it gives a nice mix of different schools, especially across different ages. You can see the focus still is mainly on elementary schools, but we still have some high schools, some middle schools in there, as well as that private public school mix because every school is a school and has children coming to it. So we care about all those. So I do have plans for all the schools. I know time is of the essence tonight, so I'll just pop through them quickly. I know you all have the presentation as well. But this is the Tuckahoe Bishop O'Connell High School. You can see North Sycamore Street here is it's an arterial street, so it will maintain as a dynamically identified school zone with the beacons. At 20 miles per hour. And then the slow zone are the purple areas. So surrounding the high school and the elementary school. And then we have Glebe. You can see the dynamic sign on Glebe Road. And then because Culpeper, provides access to the school, that's, within the school slow zone as well as 20th Street North because of an access point up here. So we really spoke with every single school. We talked with the principals or other staff just to confirm the local surroundings and make sure that we were capturing access points that weren't always clear on the map and just to understand kind of what the local dynamics are during the arrival and dismissal time and kind of behavior. This is the Claremont and Wakefield High School slow zone. You can see we've got George Mason and the surrounding schools or in the surrounding streets. St. Thomas More, Huffman Boston, Gunston Middle School, Drew Elementary, Escuela Key, Arlington Traditional, Innovation Elementary, and Cardinal Elementary. So how are we going to know if these slow zones work? We are collecting before and after speed data. So right now we actually, ACPD is a huge partner in this. They are helping us collect before data using classifiers on at least one street in each of the school zones now. And then we're going to collect after data in the spring, once people have had a little bit of time to adjust. And then we'll compare the before and after to see how people are reacting to the new speed limits and whether or not they're effectively reducing speeds. And then another part of this is feedback. We want to hear from the community as well. So we'll collect and assess feedback in spring of 2022. And it's really to gather kind of the public perception of how effective the school slow zones are and ways that we can improve the communication and the implementation of school slow zones as we go forward. So it's kind of, the first batch that we'll stop, we'll get feedback from the community once they've been actually, able to see it, experience it, drive in it, walk in it, bike in it. And then we'll get that feedback. And again, APS has been a huge partner in this effort. So they will help get the word out. They will help get feedback from their families and their communities. And, ACPD has also been a big partner too. So we'll go out through all of the county communication channels. Sorry, got something in my throat. So overall, this is our big picture timeline. We are going to the county board with a request to advertise these speed limit reductions. It's 58 street segments in 13 school zones. And so we'll bring that request to advertise to the board in October, and then have them vote to officially adopt those speed limit reductions in November. And that will also bring us into December, January for actually implementing, getting the signage out, getting the treatments out on the roads. And then at the same time, we'll begin that education, let people know it's coming, begin the communications, and eventually move into that community feedback and after data collection as we reach the spring. And then that'll take us into the summertime as we start to discuss next steps and what this looks like as we deploy on a countywide scale. So with that, I will pass it off for questions. I also have Dan Neighbors and Hui Wang here from the Transportation Engineering and Operations Division who might jump in with questions.
Great, thank you very much. Ms. Obakoya, I think we have a public commenter on this item.
We do. We have Gillian Burgess of Arlington Families for Safe Streets.
Yes, thank you. My name is Jillian Burgess, and I'm here on behalf of Arlington Families for Safe Streets. I'm here to enthusiastically support the School Slow Zones program and to thank the Vision Zero team and the APS team that's worked with them. There's been a lot of hard work that's gone into this, clearly a lot of thought, and we really appreciate it. Schools, as Christine mentioned, are not just schools, they are activity centers for the whole community. We all use school grounds as our parks. We go to schools to see theater, to see art. We go to schools to play and watch sports. We even go to schools to vote. We need to be able to get to schools safely. And safety around schools is important because these are some of our most vulnerable road users. There are lots of kids in Arlington that walk and bike to school. There's lots of teachers in Arlington that walk and bike to get to their jobs. But not only, slower speeds around schools is not only great for the safety of these vulnerable road users, but it also encourages activity, which addresses both child health and health equity. It improves air quality and noise pollution around schools and around where where children are learning. And it promotes mental health and social inclusion. All of these are very important goals for our students. As I mentioned, we enthusiastically support this program, and we are very excited about Arlington starting down this road, but we also see this as the beginning of a wonderful road. And suggest that as we move forward, not right now on the pilot, but as we move forward with this program, we look towards improving it in a number of ways. One, we hope we can have strict and equitable enforcement. Unfortunately, we have heard too often that ACPD is willing to ignore speeding up to 10 miles over the posted speed limit. When we're talking about vulnerable road users, that 10 miles an hour faster can mean a significant increase in chance of fatality. So we hope that ACPD will reverse that policy very publicly for the entire county, but especially for the school slow zones. And we appreciate that Arlington is working towards more automated speed enforcement. These school zones are exactly where we have authority to do automated speed enforcement, and we hope to see that on the ground soon. We hope that we can see a lower speed limit in the future. We have authority to go down to 15 miles an hour without special studies, and we hope to see that on the ground in Arlington in the not too distant future. And finally, as we look forward, we hope that we can look at creative solutions at even increasing the safety more. For example, there are places around the country that have closed the streets immediately in front of schools or restricted access so that only school buses and authorized vehicles can come in during school arrival and dismissal times. And those schools have seen significant increases in both student safety and in the number of students walking and biking to school. And I do mention that the number of students walking and biking to school is particularly important to APS because that is a big budgetary issue for them. School buses are wonderful and we fully support them, but they do cost APS directly. And having parents drive to school, of course, makes the whole situation around schools more dangerous, and also imposes cost on our school system. So it's fiscally very smart to encourage as much walking and biking to school as possible. So with that, I want to thank staff. I know they've worked really hard on this, and we really appreciate it. And I thank the commission for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Burgess. All right, any commissioners with questions or feedback, please go ahead and raise your hands. I'm going to kick off by basically echoing literally everything that Jillian said. I am an enthusiastic supporter of this program. I think you have knocked it out of the park on implementation pilot-wise. It's great to see the static zones. It's, I think, wise to continue doing dynamic on some of the arterials as we ease into this process. I really hope to see automated speed enforcement in school zones as we get farther along in the process. I agree with Ms. Burgess. We should be looking at partial closures of certain streets around schools to just amp the safety up that much more, and privilege those who are getting to school the best possible way, which is walking and biking. Yeah, everything Jillian said, and bravo. I flipped through this presentation slide deck and was like, yes, that, absolutely, great, wonderful. Yes, that's exactly how I would have done it. I think it's fantastic. And with that said, I will jump to Commissioner Ludlow, who has his hand up first.
Yeah, I completely agree and applaud this. Assuming the pilot shows improvement, which I have little doubt that it will, what would the next phase potentially look like in terms of the timing to deploy this to all schools in the county? Thank you.
Sure. So as we start to find the plan for, once we've had a chance to look at the before and after conditions, we'll identify, any adjustments in the treatments before moving forward to the next set of schools. And given the level of effort to define and implement the school slow zones, like I mentioned, we are having conversations with staff at each school, lots of coordination going on. It's likely that we could install up to 15 per year. So it would just take us a couple years to get to, we have 40 plus schools, I think, in the county. So it would just take a couple of years, but, I think 15 per year is about a reasonable expectation. So it wouldn't be too long for us to move that forward.
Thank you.
Commissioner Buck, you're up next.
Sure. So I'll pile on. Everything looks great. I'd certainly align myself with everything that has been suggested previously and add on a couple more yes ands for the future. Number one, I'd love to see an ultimate implementation that also considers the hub bus stops. Those are significant attractors of student walking and biking activity. And for those of us who live in areas of Arlington that are probably never getting schools, but have a lot of kids, safety around the hub bus stop is critical. The second suggestion I have forgotten. Traffic calming. And is there any sort of consideration of in sort of a future establishing a kind of a future school zone policy to couple speed calming measures that may not necessarily meet traditional traffic calming thresholds to enhance this slow zone concept?
Sure, that's a good question. As I mentioned, we're going to be assessing we are assessing each school zone to make sure that crosswalks are out, high visibility, all the signage is up to date, and then we'll have our new signage, our new pavement markings. And, we're going to see how that works. If it's working, does it make sense to add additional traffic calming measures at this time? Maybe not. But, if we do see a need to take that road design elements further, I think as we develop those school zone guidelines, we can, identify tiers of criteria or measures, that we can include into the school zone guidelines, especially in areas where we see the non-compliance. And as Jillian mentioned, we have a new, very powerful tool coming our way with the automated enforcement in these areas. So that's going to be very big and coming very soon, which is great.
Commissioner Price, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to associate myself, especially with Commissioner Buck's comments related to the hub bus stops. I think as someone who's dropped his kid off at that bus stop almost every day, I encourage us to do something about traffic around those stops. So associate myself with that. I associate myself especially with the public comment. Jillian Burgess hit the nail right on the head. I appreciate her. And I, of course, appreciate the Vision Zero team. Christine, you and your team have done an absolutely fantastic job. My only question, I guess, right now is I appreciate Arlington County Police Department and their involvement in terms of collecting data on this, but I think in terms of the education, again, I keep falling to there needs to be a stick here. I love putting up signs telling people how fast they should be going, but unless someone's getting ticketed consistently, people generally speaking ignore speed limits, having been being a frequent pedestrian and bicyclist in this neighborhood. And in all and around the county, I frequently see trouble spots. So is ACPD going to step up involvement in terms of enforcement, aside from just data collection, or what involvement will they have? I guess is the question. Thank you.
Yeah. So they've been involved as we've been conceptualizing the plans, and that that's how they came in to help us support the data collection. But they will be doing enforcement within these zones. They will be, as much as they can, focusing in on those outside of their other commitments in terms of details. And there will be a 30-day grace period, and that's going to be a really important time for us to be able to give out those warnings and to, increase awareness, let people know that this is here. And then after that 30-day grace period, they will begin, the ticketing, and they plan to enforce these. So I don't know to what degree they will be able to have that police presence there, but it's certainly part of the plan. It's something that they are on board with. So we will try to, push for that as much as possible. But yeah, I can't speak to their exact enforcement plan at this time.
About that. Squid Key, George Mason Drive's a disaster. So you need to do something about that. Thank you.
Commissioner Lantelme, you're up next.
Again, I will also associate myself with all the previous comments. This is an easy one to vote in favor of, which I intend to do, or send it forward. Thank you for the work. This is great. And I also, even though it's not traffic, I do like the continued looking at the walkshed to make sure that our sidewalks work for kids, and that the catchment area for the walking areas actually are safe and do work for walkers. Anything that can encourage kids to walk or bike to school rather than having their parents drop them off is excellent and should be definitely pursued. So thank you for all the programs, not just this, to get kids safely to school and doing it without a car. So thank you. Bye.
Commissioner Muradovic, you're up next.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I have a question about the enforcement cameras, because from what I understand, it seems like there's a study underway right now, given that we have the new authority with the 2020 General Assembly to have these cameras. And I was wondering how far along that has come, because I would really rather that would be the enforcement rather than ACPD with their patrol cars. For several reasons. One is I think it's just generally wise to lower interactions with police if not necessary. Also, like high school and school is a kind of traumatic experience for a lot of kids. So having your parents pulled over by the side of the road when you're going to school might be embarrassing. But I mean, that's like a little bit lower note. But also, I mean, judging by all the statements from ACPD, is they're chronically understaffed. So do they even have the capacity to do this? So I'm really really interested in the cameras. Thank you.
Yes, we're all very interested in the cameras. So we are currently beginning a grant. So it's a service support grant with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. And so we'll be working with a consultant to develop school zone speed camera placement guidelines. And so that will take into account all different factors, including the schools, the road types, you know, land use factors, other infrastructure factors, equity factors, all sorts of different weights that come in to help us identify where those cameras are needed the most. And that's going to help us deploy these, right? Because we can't just put a camera at every single school right now. We are going to have to prioritize. So those guidelines are going to help us. And that project is starting now. It should go till the summer. At the same time, we are working on a speed camera engagement so we can have the public weigh in before that item goes to the county board. So that will be taking place later this fall. And then once that wraps up, we will be taking the speed cameras, that code adoption to the county board, hopefully in late 2021, early 2022. And from there, police will start procurement. So all these, different factors are playing into this. The bottom line is we will likely see speed cameras in late 2022, maybe even early 2023, just because of the challenges that we do face with procurement. We need to get a new vendor to do this, and that process it's very time consuming. And there's not much that we as staff can do about that. But we're pushing all of these items forward right now. We are getting prepared. So as soon as we are able to, we can hit the ground and put these out. Unfortunately, it won't be in time for the demonstration projects, but this will be a valuable tool as we implement slow zones countywide, because, obviously we're committed to doing this over the next few years. We're going to see more and more slow zones, and then we can have that extra piece of enforcement to be able to just enhance and really make them as effective as possible. But yeah, that's a great question. We're trying as hard as we can to move that forward.
All right, wonderful. Thank you.
Any other commissioners? Not seeing any other hands. All righty. Hold on one second. I've misplaced my board report. Okay, great. I found my board report. I will move that the Transportation Commission recommend that the county board advertise for public hearing and ultimately adopt ordinance amendment to reenact and recodify Chapter 14.2, Motor Vehicles and Traffic of the Code of Arlington, Virginia, concerning maximum and minimum speed limits by creating permanent 20-mile-per-hour slow zones on 58 segments of streets near 13 schools within Arlington County.
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Brose. Is there any discussion of the motion? All right, hearing none, we will go through and vote one by one, and I will be smart and add new Commissioner Ludlow to my list of commissioners to ask how they vote. All right. Commissioner Brose.
Aye.
Commissioner Buck.
Aye.
Commissioner Fessework.
Aye.
Commissioner Lantelmi.
Aye.
Commissioner Ludlow.
Aye.
Commissioner Muradovic.
Aye.
Commissioner Price.
Aye.
I believe Commissioner Raddick is not here this evening. He was not feeling well, and I don't see Commissioner Yeri in my list. If you're here, speak up. Otherwise, I go to myself, who also votes yes. And that passes unanimously 8-0. As someone who's sixth grader is now getting himself to school on his bicycle without parental supervision, I am especially thankful to staff's hard work on this and look forward to seeing it move forward.
Thank you all so much. We're very excited to get this going.
And I think the commission will take a brief 5-minute recess break here from 9 to 9:05, and then we will jump into the next agenda item. All right, it is 9:05, and I've got my hot cocoa on this crisp fall evening, and I think we can jump back into the next commission item.
All right, so the next item is the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority Nvta call for regional transportation projects for fiscal year 2022 through fiscal year 2027 for the 6-year program funding applications. And we have Richard Rorsman here with us, and it's an action item.
Thank you, Ms. Ebekoya. Good evening, Commissioners. Rich Roisman, Regional Transportation Planning. I do not have a presentation. I would refer the Commission to the draft board report that was distributed with the meeting packet. Asking the Commission's action this evening on authorizing our application to the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority for the fiscal 22 to 27 6-year program for the Ballston Metrorail Station West entrance. Our intent is to apply for $80 million in regional transportation funding for this project to the Nvta. I'm not going to go through the rather long history of this project. However, I will focus on recent touch points and visits to the Commission because we've been talking about it a lot recently. In April, when we were discussing the county's RAISE grant applications, one of Ballston was a project that was considered for RAISE funding. It was ultimately not brought forward in favor of another project. That was an April visit and then May visit to confirm the action for the RAISE grants. In July, I came before you as an information item to introduce the call for projects for the Nvta. At that time, notified the Commission that the Ballston West entrance was the only project under consideration for applying for this funding source for this cycle. And so that is all that we are bringing forward this evening. Following the July information item, our original intent was to return for the September meeting for action. However, as part of the design updates, as this project progresses to 35% design under work by staff and consultants, also determined that it made sense to do an updated cost estimate from our outside cost estimator. Staff did not receive that until September 22nd. Therefore, we were not able to bring this for action in September. We are now bringing it forward this evening for action in October. The authority applications are actually due October 1st, which is tomorrow. The application has been submitted as of this evening, so it is in the tank. We are unfortunately having to do this a little bit backwards, but waiting for that independent updated cost estimate was very helpful. It allows us to make a firmer estimate, which will then be brought forward to update the project this spring when we do a next update of the 10-year CIP. And that estimate is a lot more firm than what was done previously, simply because of the work that has progressed on the design of the project. For those who are tracking it, in the last 10-year CIP update, the total project cost for this second entrance to the Ballston Metrorail Station was $130 million. With the new estimate, it is increased by $10 million to $140 million. In addition, the funding landscape for the project has changed significantly as design has been progressing. So when we applied to the Nvta during the last cycle, during the fiscal 24 and 25 6-year program update, we applied for only $33.5 million. Since that time, largely due to the onset of the pandemic and its impacts to other funding sources, the state, for the Virginia Department of Rail and Public and Transportation, is focusing its limited resources on transit operating systems in state of good repair, which means they are not issuing or accepting applications for major capital grants. This is something that we have $10 million from the state already on the project as part of an earlier Smart Scale grant, but we're not able to tap that well for the future given the funding situation in Richmond. Similarly, we had looked at Nbtc Commuter Choice Program as another funding source for this, and although we are planning to go forward with an application, it will be at a reduced funding level than the $10 million that we applied for previously. Because the 66 Commuter Choice Program is based on toll revenues from I-66 inside the Beltway, and the resulting decrease in travel during the pandemic really hit the revenue for that program particularly hard. So we're not able to go back for that same level for this round. Finally, the $10 million project cost increase is being covered, split 50-50 between on top of our increased ask to the Nvta, and then another $5 million in local funding commitment, which is built in to the resolution attached to the board report. So it commits the county to $30 million worth of local funding as part of the funding plan for the project. So again, we're applying for $80 million to the authority. Application is in as of this evening. I will stop at this point, not go over again the merits of the project, which I've discussed with you in previous applications. I will stop at this point and take questions from commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Roisman. I think my main question is, was that additional $5 million local funding commitment contemplated? Is it included in the recently adopted, what was it, 4-year CIP that we did this spring, or is that new money beyond what was imagined in that CIP?
I believe it is new money that will then be put forward in the next 10-year update of the CIP. The previous CIP had a $25 million funding commitment, but this additional $5 million will be new, and it is intended to come out of the C&I tax.
Thank you. Any other commissioners with questions? All right. Seeing no other hands raised. Commissioner Buck.
Not a question, just a comment. I think we're all. I mean, this has been said in previous discussions of this project, and it's pricey, and it's. I don't think any of us has too much heartburn because it's, we're spending grant money in this case. But I just, this is larger than Mr. Roisman or Mr. Maloff and the great work you guys do securing financing, but just more visibility on exactly how we prioritize our CIP projects, because there is a substantial opportunity cost of taking our $140 million check for this versus what else may be sort of out there in the universe. So I don't even want you to respond, Mr. Roisman. I just wanted to offer that as sort of a overarching comment, and I will vote in favor when the time comes.
Gotcha. I appreciate Commissioner Buck's comments because I feel similarly. I intend to vote in favor of this, but it is really hard not to look at $140 million and not think about what else $140 million could have bought us. Like half a streetcar line, instead of somewhat improved access to an existing metro station. I look forward to seeing the second entrance in Ballston. I look forward to seeing a second entrance in Crystal City, and I hope to not vote for funding another second entrance to a metro station in Arlington anytime soon, when we have so many other things we could be doing with large pots of transit money. Seeing no other commissioner hands raised, though I can't see Mr. Lantelmi on my screen right now, so if he's raising his physical hand, I can't see that. I will just go ahead and move that the Transportation Commission. Oh, no, he does not.
No.
Okay, great. I will move that the Transportation Commission recommend that the county board adopt the proposed grant application for the Ballston West entrance as outlined in our draft board report.
Second.
A second from Commissioner Price. Any discussion of the motion? Seeing none. How do you vote, Commissioner Brose?
Aye.
Commissioner Buck?
Aye.
Commissioner Feswork?
Aye.
Commissioner Lantelmi?
Aye.
Commissioner Ludlow?
Aye.
Commissioner Maradovic?
Aye.
Commissioner Price?
Aye.
And I will also vote yes. That passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Roisman, for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, so next on the agenda, we have the Missing Middle Housing Study Phase 1 report with Matt Ladd and Kelly Brown.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. We're here tonight to present a summary of key findings and recommendations from the Missing Middle Housing Study Phase 1 report. So I will go ahead and share my screen. All right, great, thank you. So this presentation summarizes highlights from the Phase 1 report, Expanding Housing Choice, the Missing Middle Housing Study. The report summarizes the priorities and concerns that have been shared by the community and recommendations for a scope of work and specific housing types to study in Phase 2. While Arlington has a range of housing options for housing other than single household homes and apartments in mid-rises and high-rises are limited. This study is exploring how allowing other choices could meet a wider range of household housing needs, such as smaller housing options with lower housing costs, starter homes, more bedrooms, better accessibility, or private open space. This study is also about managing change already happening. The supply of existing smaller single household homes is shrinking as smaller homes are torn down and replaced with larger homes. While these new homes are meeting the needs of some households, the results also include loss of less expensive homes, loss of trees, and stormwater management issues. So this study is also exploring how change managed thoughtfully could positively impact Arlington's future. The study has been divided into 3 phases. First, to build a common understanding of key priorities and concerns and housing types to study. And then in Phase 2 and Phase 3, diving into more focused study and recommendations to enable more housing choice. The study team will share the Phase 1 report with the County Board this fall to confirm the plan for which housing types to study and the issues to consider. Prior to finalizing the report, the team is seeking community feedback. So staff is scheduled to present at several commissions in addition to Transportation Commission tonight, and also reaching out in other ways as well, prioritizing outreach to those hardest to reach, as well as study newcomers and reaching the broadest array of stakeholders possible. So in terms of the community engagement that we've conducted, it has resulted in an identification of several key priorities and concerns. And this is a quick summary of what we've learned. There's much more detail in the report itself. Key priorities include first, reducing housing costs, adding more housing supply, and adding housing options that reflect the need of the whole community. Conserving tree canopy and maintaining connections to nature. Achieving sustainable land use and construction, investing in schools and infrastructure to keep pace with growth, and finally maintaining and expanding what people already value about their neighborhoods: diversity, connections with neighbors, and walkability. Key concerns include the impacts of growth on quality of life, loss of existing housing stock and diversity, and the suitability of other housing options with existing neighborhoods. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Matt Ladd, to present our recommendations for Phase 2.
Thank you. I'm Matt Ladd with the county's comprehensive planning team. And next slide, please, Kelly. So the second half of the Phase 1 report describes staff's preliminary recommendations for Phase 2. This will be an opportunity for detailed study of expanding housing choice in Arlington with a focus on addressing the priorities and concerns described in the previous slides. Staff will be supported in this work by an experienced team of economic consultants and architects, and also by subject matter experts on county staff, including DES transportation staff. Some of the high-level questions to be answered in Phase 2 are shown on the slide. Where should missing middle housing types be allowed within Arlington? How could expanded housing choice meet community priorities? What are trade-offs between the benefits of expanding housing choice and community concerns? And how did the expected outcomes of new policies compare to today's business as usual approach to housing? We expect to share the preliminary findings from this analysis with the community in the early part of next year, with staff recommendations and requests for county board review in the second quarter of 2022. Next slide, please. This graphic shows what we call our family tree of missing middle housing, with 4 categories and 10 housing types overall. These 10 types were presented during our online engagement last spring with more than 400 people participating in that engagement. And in the draft phase 1 report, staff is recommending advancing the housing types circled on this slide. Can we get to the circle? Thank you. For more focused study in phase 2. This includes single detached homes on smaller lots than required today, duplexes, townhomes, and small multiplexes up to 8 units. We believe that all of these housing options could potentially meet community priorities articulated throughout phase 1. That said, the resources and time needed to complete the study are not limitless, so there are 2 housing types that staff proposes should not advance to phase 2. Cottage clusters, that's one of the ones we're not recommending to advance, are just like they sound. A cluster of small single detached homes that share common spaces. These are not recommended for phase 2 because they typically require larger lots than would be available likely for development in an Arlington infill context. And accessory dwellings are a housing type that is already permitted in Arlington, and the zoning ordinance was recently amended to support the construction of new accessory homes. So staff is recommending allowing these recent amendments to be implemented and evaluated before considering additional changes. Next slide. The phase 2 analysis will be iterative and will have 4 main components shown on the left side of the screen. The first will be considering design alternatives for each of the housing types and how they could physically fit within the Arlington context. Some of the variables that will be considered are lot size and dimensions, setbacks, height, lot coverage, parking ratios and locations of parking, the housing unit sizes and bedrooms that could be achieved, accessibility, and tree canopy and stormwater requirements. We'll also look at how each housing type provides opportunities to meet community priorities and what the impacts of expanding choice might be. One of the main questions to be answered in phase 2 is what prices or rents would we expect for missing middle housing types in different neighborhoods within Arlington? With the aid of our economic consultants, we will answer this question and also estimate the likely pace of construction throughout the county under different scenarios. We recognize that every housing type might not be appropriate to build everywhere within Arlington, so we will consider various locational factors such as proximity to transportation options and others based on findings from the impact analysis. The outcome of phase 2 will be preliminary recommendations for design parameters and locations of different housing types. Staff will likely identify trade-offs between community priorities and concerns, and this analysis will be considered against the status quo, where only large single detached homes can be built in many Arlington neighborhoods. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, phase 2 would begin at the conclusion of phase 1 later this year. The analysis work and initial community engagements would last through the first quarter of next year. This would include engagement with our community partner network, the broader public, commissions, and we also seek advice from community professionals with expertise in areas such as zoning, design, construction, and real estate. Based on that analysis and community feedback, staff will bring forward recommendations for expanding housing choice and supply in the second quarter of 2022. And then based on county board direction, the study will move into phase 3, where we will consider actual zoning text to implement the phase 2 recommendations. We expect to complete phase 3 and the study overall by the end of 2022. Next slide. For more information and to review the draft phase 1 report, you can visit the project site shown on the screen. And in addition to tonight's meeting, you can provide feedback on the report and the overall study to staff via the Housing Arlington email address shown on the screen. And we're happy to hear any comments or questions from commissioners.
Great, thank you very much. Commissioners, if you have questions or comments, throw your hands up. I'm just going to kick off and say, I love the missing middle housing study. Glad it's moving forward. Like, I just think it's too much. It's too slow. Like, every month that we spend forecasting rents and studying impacts and looking at design trade-offs, another 50 McMansions are getting thrown up on, a little 50, a little bungalow that, finally met its end of useful life. And instead of 4 spots for 4 families, we're getting a spot for one big family, or one small family with way too much space. So like, I have no substantive feedback for you other than like, do it faster and make it easy. Like, I just feel like we've lost the sense of urgency we need on this study. I'm so sad to see it stretching well into 2022. Commissioner Lantelmi, I saw your physical hand.
Yes, thank you. I already gave comments when you were giving this presentation at the LRPC. So thank you for doing it again. Specifically to transportation for this, and I think I raised this before, please make sure that parking is part of this, that we do not have artificial barriers to additional units because, oops, there isn't enough parking, or we can't have tandem parking, or there's not or because we have to have so many cars parked here, it's too much lot coverage. We can't have those artificial parking restrictions keep us from having the units we need. We can't have cars over dwelling units. So make sure that that is part of the study. It's just so important that the more we have to reduce barriers, that we can have things happen by right, and by right easily, the more units we could then have. So the incentives have to be there in order to make it as easy as possible. Certainly no more difficult than building a by right single family house right now. So thank you for that. And by the way, I do concur with Chairman Slatt on let's move this forward. Thank you.
Commissioner Buck, you're up next.
Yeah, I'm hearty agreement with both Commissioners Lantelmi and Slatt. I will say, as impatient as I am for rezoning, I just wanted to commend you on the upfront research reports that were just really good reading, and I think set up the need for this so well, and your recommendations on how to go forward are on point as well. Regarding the parking issue, I guess I'll put a note out into the cosmos for Stephen Krim at DES, where, assuming that parking is going to be some part of whatever solution arrives at, I hope DES takes all of the parking data and accumulates parking data to try and streamline where there is a need for, say, someday somebody like me wants to subdivide their lot and has to do a parking study, that it's super easy for me to access known parking count data that says my street is radically underparked and just doesn't need an additional parking spot. So that's just a suggestion I'd have more for the DES side as you're moving forward, and assuming that we don't end up in the world that many of us might like to see, which is just no more parking requirements. The other thing I just wanted to say is I'm not sure if I saw it in your considerations, but two things that I find personally important in screening which zoning changes may eventually get advanced are, one, how quickly people can actually act on them and add to our housing stock. We just have we've got 10 years to sort of change the curve on carbon, and we've got 25,000 new Amazon employees making $150K a year coming into our community, and just bending the curve on housing supply in the short term, I think, is critically important. The other one is creating more ownership options. Just so many of our larger developments seem to be tilting towards rental, and I think people I think there is a need for just ownership opportunities for people who want to take an equity stake in the community, having some more options, not only on housing size and type, but also tenure options. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buck. Commissioner Brose, you're up next.
Thank you. I think I was just going to pile on a little bit with Chair Slatt's comments about the first reaction was the end of 2022. It's too late. There's so many things happening now in the county and even looking for opportunities that are, good transportation locations for housing. Even those opportunities are going to start disappearing as developers snatch them up and do their own development. I don't know. I think the comment from Commissioner Buck around rental versus ownership. Homeownership is a whole other topic, in equality and equity in that. I think rental units still remain an important part of our housing inventory, but certainly support the opportunities for folks to purchase homes. So again, I'm not sure we're going to change that with one of these studies, but anyway, applaud the efforts and keep at it.
Thank you, Commissioner Burrows. I'm not seeing any more hands going once, going twice. So I will just thank, no, it's gone. Thank Ms. Brown and Mr. Ladd for the presentation and look forward to seeing this move forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we're down to the last agenda item before other business, and it's Arlington Georgetown Transit Enhancement with Laura Miller Brooks and Dan Mulliff.
Wonderful. Good evening, everybody. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. I'm getting my cameras set up, and now I will share my screen. Here we go. Okay. Good evening, members of the Arlington County Transportation Commission. My name is Laura Miller Brooks, and I am the Senior Transportation and Infrastructure Associate at the Federal City Council, and I'm also the Project Manager for the Georgetown to Metro Transit Enhancement Study, which I will be talking to you about tonight. I think it's important to start by saying tonight I'm not here to talk to you about the gondola. But I instead plan to introduce myself, the project team, why we're here. This study did and partnership did grow out of that 2016 Georgetown to Roslyn gondola feasibility study. But I'll talk to you about what this scope is trying to achieve and focusing really on Arlington County's role and the benefits of this study. And then finally, we'll do some time for questions and discussion. So who are we? The Federal City Council, District Department of Transportation, which is DDOT, the Georgetown Business Improvement District, and Georgetown University have formed a partnership to advance planning for improved transit between Georgetown and Metrorail. This project team and study are the genesis of what is that 2016 Georgetown to Roslyn gondola feasibility study. And Arlington County was a partner in that study, but this study and project team are really focused on broadening the scope of that 2016 study and developing a broad range of alternatives. Some of those alternatives may require federal action, and because of that, we may enter the National Environmental Policy Act at a future stage. So we have National Capital Planning Commission serving as the lead federal agency on this initial environmental review project. This is a $250,000 effort, and it's funded by the District of Columbia, and the project work is being managed by the Federal City Council. The consultant team selected to do this work was VHB Metro DC. So why the partnership formed around the study and why this team is still interested in the issues is because sort of the core question from that 2016 gondola feasibility study, which is, can transit access to Georgetown be improved, especially access to jobs, still has not been met. So Georgetown is, as you can see here, we've got about 23,000 jobs. It's one of the region's largest employment centers without convenient metro access. The project team believes that improving transit access from the metro rail system to Georgetown could be a critical tool for enhancing access to good jobs, health services, education, hospitality, retail, and more for Arlington, Virginia, and district residents alike. And finally, I think this is a really great project for Arlington County to be involved with. And I think that's because, as you can see here, a key finding of that 2016 gondola feasibility study was that a direct connection from the Roslyn Metro to Georgetown. In this case, via an aerial gondola, really expanded the 30-minute transit shed to more neighborhoods in the region. So you'll see in the light green, that's actually how much more coverage Georgetown can be accessible to in 30 minutes. And as you'll see, there's quite a bit of increased access that's a result of that in Arlington. And again, we're focused on really broadening the scope here and looking at a much broader range of alternatives from gondola, and then assessing each alternative's ability to enhance access to Georgetown from the Metro rail system. This study will incorporate the significant amount of transit analysis that's been done in the corridor since 2016. And on the Arlington side, it'll incorporate some of the following studies that have had Arlington County participate in. So as I've noted, the study will develop alternatives that meet what is the draft purpose and need, and I'll get into kind of that process in the next slide. Some of these alternatives may go to NEPA and require federal action, some may not. But at the end of this, this group will decide kind of, are we moving ahead into NEPA, or are Arlington County or DDOT able to move forward with an alternative that increases transit but doesn't require federal action? I think the other big thing for Arlington County to draw your attention to here is that, from this 2016 Georgetown to Roslyn gondola feasibility study, the difference is really this study is looking at all kind of a big host of Metro rail surrounding the area. So it is not just Roslyn. We've got DuPont, Farragut North, Farragut West, and Foggy Bottom included in this project study area. The study steps really start with drafting the purpose and need, identifying alternatives, engaging key agency stakeholders, and then the public via a few online questionnaires. We'll then do an environmental scan, and at the end of this, as I said, recommend alternatives to how they kind of rank according to the draft purpose and need, and then against agency input as well as the environmental input. This is a little bit more detailed of a timeline of the study scope. As you can see, there are a lot of steps. It's a one-year project. We kicked it off in June 2021. We're now really in this developing purpose and need phase, which is the first phase of work, where we'll incorporate input from key agencies and stakeholders. And then, as I said, there's a questionnaire that is open right now. We're about to move into an exciting time, which is we'll actually bring a large, broad range of alternatives to start screening them and screening those against that draft purpose and need. We'll conduct a preliminary environmental scan to kind of identify resource impact areas. And then finally, the project team will recommend alternatives based on their ability to address that purpose and need, and whether or not a formal NEPA process would begin, or if, again, an alternative that's recommended here would advance through a local agency design process. Here's a list of the key agencies in the working group who we're working with. On the Arlington County side, we're lucky to have Dan Moloff as our lead staff engaged in this, and then have the wonderful folks, Mary Claire Burek, the president, and Allie Henry, who heads up community planning for the Roslyn bid. And we're really grateful to have that Arlington perspective in this key stakeholder group. Here's how Arlington County will participate. Again, we just launched this project. I'm here today to really just be giving an overview of kind of how the project will evolve. But right now, it's really the staff participation. Dan has been engaged with our kickoff meeting, and then also in the process to do draft purpose and need. He'll incorporate, and county staff will incorporate county plans and data. We're very grateful for the collaboration there, convey county perspectives, and help us again with alternatives and weigh in there. As I noted, this is my first Transportation Commission presentation on the project, but I hope to come back if you'll have me. But again, we're looking to tell you that we've embarked on this process, but are really excited to come back as we get closer to kind of looking at our alternatives and engage you all there. And then county board briefings at the request of board members, and then public engagement with 2 questionnaires. The first is open right now and really is about draft purpose and need, and the second will be, if we go back here, later on in the alternatives analysis. And the final thing I want to leave you with is that we really see this as something that is a great thing for Arlington County, and the county will benefit from the study by helping capture and kind of understand the impact of traffic congestion across various modes. So maybe that's guts bus or the circulator or bicyclists and pedestrian issues, rideshare, et cetera. It'll also help Arlington County understand and analyze how those modes and then various alternatives that create solutions for those modes really enhance connections. And then I think it'll, hopefully provide a new platform for imagining how Arlington County can connect with Georgetown and create maybe a bigger corridor that benefits economic development and placemaking initiatives and creates a more cohesive Roslyn to Ballston, Roslyn to National Landing, and generally, broader Arlington to Georgetown connection. So with that, thank you all again for your time. Excited to answer any questions and hear any feedback. And then again, if you can take this 6-minute questionnaire, I can click on it here in a moment and share it with your network. We're working with county staff and community partners in the bid on this, but it closes next Friday, and we'd be really happy whether you go to Georgetown every day or you avoid it. We want to hear your perspective, and again, we're excited to be sharing this information. You can visit the Federal City Council's website for any more information and reach out to me anytime. And just really quick, I'll just show you, this is what the questionnaire looks like. And again, if I can share these slides after and encourage you all to take the questionnaire. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Nice to see Federal City Council across the river once in a while. I think my main question is this truly a broad look at transit connectivity between Georgetown and Roslyn, or is this Nvta for the gondola and we're all just doing that wink wink thing where we like pretend that it could be anything, but everybody actually knows what it's going to come out at the end?
I so appreciate you asking that, Commissioner Slatt, because that's, again, I started with that because we are putting everything on the table. We know that gondola is feasible, but we have no clue how it or bus rapid transit or these various alternatives that both the county and district have looked at in the corridor hold up against each other. And we feel like there are enough alternatives that have now been developed that if we have a purpose and need that's developed by, again, those stakeholders that are very broad, that we can have a real conversation about this right now.
Great, glad to hear it. Commissioner Lantalmi.
Yes, thank you. So yes, I'll just continue on from Chairman Slatt's excellent question, because that was mine too. So you will be considering such things as an exclusive bus lane on Key Bridge, for example, enhanced circulator service, because the whole thing. Okay, because the whole thing with the tram, if it ever gets done, it doesn't go anywhere other than that one gas station in Georgetown. And then, so you're not even talking about 2-seat ride, you're talking about 3-seat rides, which just doesn't really work. So you really are seriously looking at multiple alternatives for getting in and out of Georgetown from Roslyn.
Absolutely. And that's the point, right, is that so much work has been done since the gondola was deemed feasible in 2016. And the gondola feasibility study had really compelling, again, that transit shed, really thinking about who it increases access for, how. Right. But yeah, exactly. There are so many other alternatives that have been analyzed, and none of them have been, put together and kind of analyzed.
Yeah, the problem I have with that transit shed is that, yeah, it makes a lot of sense, but it's only for getting you to that abandoned gas station in Georgetown. Then you have to get up to Georgetown Hospital, which is a long walk up a hill. or to West End, which is a long walk down M Street or a bus ride down M Street. So I always look at that shed map as being a little disingenuous because it's not looking at the real destinations that people are going to would be using the tram for. And I know there's examples if they exist. The Roosevelt Island tram in New York is paralleled by a subway and people still use it. But I'd like to get to know more about how that actually operates, because it's almost the reverse of what we're trying to do here. So I'd like to know more about how that works and where people come and go and why it still exists other than as a nice tourist ride. Anyway, thank you.
Commissioner Buck, you're up next.
I will admit I'm a gondola agnostic, I guess. I don't know. I'm trying to mush that. That's not a fashionable thing to be, but I honestly thought the feasibility study was interesting, and the two biggest weaknesses I saw in it when I read it were, one, the fact that it's a gondola. There's just an optics issue to overcome, and we'll put that aside. The other one was the ridership forecasting, and that was one where I think, coming from a bid that was leading that study, it sort of left a lot of question marks. So I would urge you on all of the alternatives to really for VHB or whoever's leading sort of the forecasting part of it to really put some rigor into applying a somewhat consistent and defensible ridership feasibility framework, and just making that really transparent, because I think wherever the study lands up, I think that is going to be the part that is going to, I don't know, that would be the part that I would be most interested. Another little factoid I'd love to see just out of the study is we've seen the transit shed. I'd love to see just sort of to the extent that the consultant can glean it out of COG data, is just an estimate of how many drivers are coming through our system in Arlington, going over Key Bridge, ending their trip somewhere in Georgetown, so we can get sort of a good early look at the potential value of coming up with a solution to this, whatever, be it exclusive bus lanes, gondola, canoes, whatever. Thanks.
Commissioner, I appreciate both of those notes, and we'll definitely take both of those back to our consultant team, and just want to assure you that to me, that's actually also the most interesting thing about the 2016 study, was some of that ridership forecasting, and it's compelling, and it's something that I absolutely think needs to be, kind of as we look at all the alternatives, again, have a metric that can be applied. And to the previous commissioner's comment on just looking at one kind of drop-off location, the VHB team is expecting to create kind of transit sheds from various nodes. And what we're actually doing in the purpose and need process right now is taking a look at where people are going in Georgetown, where they need to go, what challenges they're facing when they go to MedStar versus the M Street corridor versus the waterfront. So want to assure you both that those comments are absolutely front of mind, and appreciate the feedback. So thank you.
Great. Commissioner Price, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the presentation. I definitely want to associate myself with a lot of the comments that have been made, Commissioner Buck, Commissioner Lantelmi, and especially Commissioner Slatt. I'm very, I've got to say this, as soon as that survey came out, I was, how do I say this? I got it about a few minutes because I got tied up, but I completed the survey and noted that if this turns out to be a sort of a wink, wink, nod, nod, we're going to try to re-justify the need for the gondola, then you're going to lose this audience right here and probably right now. We know, I mean, at least I know from the studies that came out of WMATA, that the extension of the blue line seems like this solution. We need a second tunnel. We need a station in Georgetown. That is the future. Don't run down a rabbit hole with the gondola, because that'll just make us a laughing stock and a kind of a joke. So I encourage you I love the idea of bus lanes along the Key Bridge. That would help move traffic. Otherwise, we're going to start down a rabbit hole that you just don't want to go. But thank you. I appreciate it. I took the survey, so it was really good. It was very functional. I really appreciated that. And I look forward to working with you in the future. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks, Commissioner.
Commissioner Ludlow, you're back up.
Yeah, thank you. I commute every day to Georgetown, and every day that I go to the office in the post-pandemic period, it's just a few days a week. And I do typically ride my bike. Sometimes I drive. My staff, the people who work with me, also commute to Georgetown, either from Arlington or from the district, and they rely on the circulator bus. And there are so many more improvements that could be made to that bus in terms of its frequency, its reliability, even the customer service that's offered by its drivers, which I hear about from my colleagues. There's so many things that could be done, low-hanging fruit, to really improve the way that flows and functions and offers connectivity deeper into Arlington and deeper into the district. I would just urge the Federal City Council and VHB and partners to take a very close look at all of the possible improvements to the circulator, including the dedicated bus lanes that others have mentioned, really frequent headways, other possibilities, better information to make that a seamless experience. When we have visitors from out of town, they're often staying in Roslyn. Crossing Key Bridge on foot to them is not a problem. In fact, it's a distinct pleasure. So there's something very beautiful about that bridge, and the entrance to DC right there, the way it is, could be enhanced more. The last thing I'll mention is I would be really curious to know, not sure whether there's funding availability to do this in the study, the degree to which the VHB team is collecting kind of personal movement data, including location-based services data off of cell phones and other things, to kind of look at how people move within and outside of the study area. I think that's absolutely critical because Georgetown is such a distinct multinodal place. There are different purposes to those trips that people are taking, as mentioned, to the hospital, to retail, to work, to school. So there may not be money to do that, but that's kind of the way that a lot of the studies, especially related to bridge crossing work that I've been involved in, that's some of the data that's been pursued in the past and can be helpful. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Commissioner. If I can just real quick, I'll give you my best responses. I think first off, I'll just broadly say that's why I'm here today. We really want your ideas. We really want to hear from you, and we know that this is a corridor, and that, as you said, your staff are taking that bus trip every day, and there are a lot of improvements that could be made. I will say that, and again, so please share these public comment opportunities. It is a $250,000 study. Which is not much in the scope of these studies, right? This is very, very preliminary, and this is focused on bringing stakeholders. So Arlington County has done a ton of this analysis, ton of public outreach and work, National Park Service on other components, the district, right? So bringing everybody together to say, okay, a lot of this work since 2016 has been done. Let's look at it, let's have a conversation, and let's decide, is this to increase access to jobs for people who do not live in Georgia, right? Like there are, and again, we're looking to focus on drafting purpose and need, and then bringing alternatives and doing very, very high level screening. So, on the personal data side, I will see what we can get, but I will say this is, that's really expensive. The nice NRICS data is not cheap, as you noted. And so I think that's something that we know that we want done, but would probably have to be justified in the context of a bigger study, right? Or kind of developing a truly, whether that's the local regulations or the NEPA, there's significant public engagement and there's cost associated with some of that. So we see this as pre-whatever that work is. And then finally, you know, I think part of this is that the district government pays for circulator, right? And so when you're talking about improvements to the circulator, something I want to remind Arlington County of is that we are looking at improvements not across Key Bridge for this. We are looking at improvements to Farragut's and Foggy Bottom and DuPont, and those are places where the district has full, you know, responsibility to district taxpayers, and this component of work is fully funded by district taxpayers. And so I think there has to be Arlington County's done a lot of this work already, and it's great work, and we want to bring that to the table and have that conversation. But B, you know, in this process, if the county identifies areas where more rigor or more analysis is needed, I think this is where county staff really should be a part of the conversation and be engaged with what we're hearing today. So thank you all.
Great. Anyone else? Final questions or comments for Ms. Brooks? All right. Seeing none, I thank you for the presentation and for staying here late into the night after all of our other agenda items.
Me. Yeah, it was great.
Thank you. That was the last agenda item for the evening. Now we can move on to other business.
Oh goodness! It looks like development approval is ramping back up in Arlington County. You all, you know, already had the opportunity to weigh in on Wendy's residential that went through, but it looks like we have two more coming up very rapidly. A affordable housing proposal in Radnor-Fort Myer Heights, which is that weird neighborhood just south of 50 from Roslyn, near Iwo Jima. A potential redevelopment of the Xerox building in Roslyn. Penn Place is moving from LRPC to SPRC. And there are two potential special GLUP studies coming up. So for those of you who may not have been around quite so long, a special GLUP study is kind of a process Arlington goes through when a development proposal is potentially coming forward. There's interest in an area that has no real planning guidance that would guide a potential upzoning or change in the general land use plan. So we saw one of those for the area around the YMCA, the Kirkwood Special GLUP study. We saw one of those in Shirlington. Now we're seeing there's two meetings coming up, one for the Sunrise Living on Glebe Road, south of Langston Boulevard. They're near the pie shop, and something else that has totally gone out of my head just now, some other special GLUP study. So that said, there's lots of work to be done. So if people are interested in any of these.
Courthouse West is the other special GLUP.
Courthouse West?
Yeah, we're across from the Whole Foods. I think that's the one that they're looking at doing.
You sure I got another one from Margaret.
Fast and Furious.
Yes, Eid Street Residential. That was the other one I was thinking of.
Okay. Well,
just south of 23rd Street. So yeah. Yeah, so there's lots of work to be done. Really encourage you, if any of these projects sound interesting to you, let me know. I would love to appoint you to be TC's representative on some of these site plan review committee meetings, because we're definitely, getting to the point where, one or two people can't handle them all. So keep your eyes peeled, more emails coming. Does anybody else have anything they want to raise here during other commission business, either liaison things, or I don't know, anything? I want to commend Commissioner Ludlow. I believe he spoke more often in his first meeting than any other commissioner that I can recall, and everything was great questions and great comments. So bravo. Commissioner Fessiwork, look at this great example. You should talk more. I like it every time you do. And hearing nothing else, Commissioner Obukoya, when's our next meeting?
The next meeting is October 28th at 7 p.m.
And I'm assuming, given that that is less than 30 days from now, we can count on that being virtual still?
That is correct.
All righty.
It's our November meeting, so.
Great. Thanks, everybody. You need anything, let me know. If you're interested in any of those SPRCs, special GLUP studies, anything like that, please let me know. And I'll see you in 29 days.
Have a good evening.
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everybody.